1970. The year that brought the swinging 60s to a close was about as harsh a morning after as the Poseidon Adventure, although that was still a few years away. After instilling the nation with the blind optimism of flower power and Beatlemania, the back half of the 1960s came crashing down with the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., the beginning of the Vietnam War, and the Manson family.
Go ride a horse.
1970 rode that bleak wave into a decade marked by geopolitical unrest, gas shortages, natural disasters, serial killers, terrorism, and one of the biggest scandals in 20th century American politics. And also a bunch of really groovy movies. Almost too many, really.
Oh, I can imagine quite a bit.
We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports, and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. Get ready for some forgettable Beatles solo albums, because this one is all about 1970. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below your favorite 70s memory. Now, are you ready to boogie down?
Let's all dance through the night together.
Despite positive changes brought about by the civil rights movement and a national excitement over the possibilities of space exploration following Neil Armstrong's historic first steps on the moon, the decade began on uncertain ground. Two-thirds of Americans disapproved of the U.S.'s involvement in the Vietnam War. The year ahead would see the continued proliferation of nuclear weapons, a shocking display of state violence, an infamous space disaster that nearly ended in tragedy, and the dissolution of one of the most influential bands of all time. But it wasn't all bad.
The Hollywood coroner says an overdose of narcotics is responsible for the death of the well-known rock singer Janis Joplin.
Okay, so it was mostly bad. Some years just start out in desperate need of a do-over and never fully recover.
When we get started.
When do we get started?
That's my line.
This is 1970.
Sayonara, mister!
The Who's drummer and resident party animal Keith Moon kicked off the decade by drunkenly running over his own chauffeur while trying to escape an unruly mob of skinheads outside a pub in London. The group surrounded Moon's Bentley and began pelting it, at which point Moon's driver, Neil Boland, climbed out to confront them. The skinheads pummeled Boland mercilessly, and a terrified Moon grabbed the wheel and took off. This was ultimately ruled an accident, and Moon was cleared of any wrongdoing, although it haunted the drummer for the rest of his life.
Where are you? Still didn't answer my question.
Which was?
You were sort of lost in thought when I came in. What about?
Maybe I was trying to be one of your grandmother's gypsies. Read the future in the flames.
4 months after leading a military coup against Libya's King Idris, Muammar al-Gaddafi is declared premier of Libya by the government he'd just created. Funny how that works out. Gaddafi was an army captain and fierce Arab nationalist who sought to purge Libya of Western influence, removing U.S. and British military bases from the country, and deporting Libyans with Italian and Jewish heritage within his first year of power. The controversial dictator remained in power for just over 40 years, until he would be captured and killed by members of Libya's National Liberation Army on October 20th, 2011, during the First Libyan Civil War. It's safe to say his popularity rating had dropped some in the intervening years.
This isn't a hospital! It's an insane asylum, and it's your fault! Because you don't do anything to let guys out!
What do you want me to do?
Put them under arrest! See what a court-martial thinks of their drunken hooliganism!
Famed folk pop duo Simon & Garfunkel released their final studio album, Bridge Over Troubled Water, on January 26th before splitting up for good later that year. Their swan song, considered by many to be the pair's best, went on to become one of the best-selling albums of all time, with over 25 million copies sold worldwide. That's a whole lot of wax. Speaking of landmark albums, the Jackson 5's first single, I Want You Back, reached the #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100 on January 31st, fresh off their history-making appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show in December.
Here's the usual Jackson 5, opening with a medley of their hits that have sold over 1 million.
The group released 3 other #1 singles that year: ABC, The Love You Save, and I'll Be There, making them the first recording artists in history to have their first 4 singles reach the top spot. Flash forward to October 7th, 1971, when the group's magnetic lead singer, Michael Jackson, released his first single as a solo artist, Got to Be There, when he was just 13 years old.
We'll be right back.
Give me a J, give me an A. When I'm eating alphabet, I'm okay. I'm gonna eat a dog.
What, you crazy man?
What's that spell?
Dog!
I ate it. Gonna eat my alphabet, A to the Z.
I want you to remember that no bastard ever won war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country.
The legendary heavy metal band Black Sabbath released their self-titled debut album on February 13th, introducing the world to their colorful frontman, Ozzy Osbourne, for the first time.
We like the name Black Sabbath, so
We just like the name, you know.
Why did you pick the name in the first place?
why did the Beatles pick the Beatles, Nobody knows.
According to the band's guitarist, Tony Iommi, the album was recorded in one day during a single 12-hour session. Black Sabbath's debut is widely considered to be the first heavy metal album, and one of the most influential records of the 20th century. The Chicago 7, the name given to the men standing trial for allegedly inciting a riot during anti-Vietnam protests at the Democratic National Convention in August of 1968, were found innocent on charges of conspiracy on February 18th. Rennie Davis, David Dellinger, John Froines, Tom Hayden, Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, and Lee Weiner were all acquitted.
The judge knows that the only one who's in contempt of his court is Julius Hoffman.
We're going to have demonstrations at local courts across this country.
The last witness was a rebuttal to Rennie's testimony. It was hysterical. He didn't see any defendant there. He didn't see anybody on a bullhorn yelling, "Kill a pig." Nothing. Where's their case? I seen more evidence in a case of scotch.
Davis, Dellinger, Hayden, Hoffman, and Rubin were convicted of crossing state lines to start a riot, but those convictions, along with several others for contempt of court, were eventually reversed. In late March, the United States detonated its 500th nuclear device since dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 as part of its ongoing nuclear testing program. America would set off more than 1,000 nuclear explosions before a moratorium was placed on testing by President George H.W. Bush. In October 2nd, 1992, President Clinton extended the moratorium and signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1996.
The treaty will constrain any nation from improving its existing nuclear arsenal and end the development of advanced nuclear weapons and help to stop their spread.
The treaty has yet to be ratified by Congress. Not that we're going to start setting off nukes again, we just like to keep our options open. At the end of March, jazz legend Miles Davis released his 27th studio album, Bitches Brew. The album would go on to become Davis's highest charting, topping out at number 35, and would earn him the first gold record of his career. To date, Bitches Brew is regarded as one of the best jazz albums ever recorded. On April 1st, President Richard Nixon signed a bill banning cigarette advertising on radio and television.
Hey, how would you like to have a phone like that?
Great, then I can see you all the time.
Don't settle for some of the taste, some of the time. Viceroy gives you all the taste, all the time.
To the woe of the tobacco industry, this was not an April Fool's joke.
Philip Morris Company has bought all commercial time on the first half hour of all the network talk shows tonight. That is the last half hour on which it is legal to sell cigarettes on radio or television in the United States. It marks, as we like to say, the end of an era.
Regulation of the tobacco industry had ramped up following increasingly alarming health studies linking smoking to cancer, heart disease, and birth defects, including a report by the Surgeon General linking smoking to low birth weight. The last televised cigarette ad ran on January 1st, 1971, at 11:50 p.m. during The Johnny Carson Show. The hearts of millions of Beatlemaniacs around the world were shattered on April 10th, when Paul McCartney officially announced his departure from the Beatles. In the spirit of the well-known tensions that had steadily developed between the bandmates, McCartney revealed he would no longer be working with the rest of the Fab Four in a press release promoting the impending release of his solo album, McCartney. The release took the form of a fictional Q&A, featuring questions reportedly written mostly by Sir Paul himself. Despite the fact that neither the general public nor the rest of the Beatles themselves initially knew how seriously to take McCartney's announcement, it turned out to be the real deal. The band never reunited. Keeping it real classy, Sir Paul. One day later, Apollo 13 embarked on its ill-fated voyage to the moon. 2 days into the mission, an oxygen tank at the command module failed, forcing the crew, Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert, to abandon their planned lunar landing.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Over the next 3 days, the entire nation held its breath as NASA Mission Control worked tirelessly in a race against time to bring the 3 astronauts home. The crew finally returned safely to Earth, thanks to some DIY ingenuity that would have made MacGyver proud.
The men of Apollo 13 epitomize the character that accepts danger and surmounts it. Theirs is the spirit that built America.
Flash forward to June 30th, 1995, when director Ron Howard's blockbuster film about the unforgettable mission was released in theaters.
Houston, we have a problem.
The appropriately titled Apollo 13 went on to become the second highest grossing movie of 1995 and was nominated for 9 Oscars.
We'll be right back.
Introducing the G.I. Joe Space-O-Matic. Space-O-Matic, the futuristic space vehicle you program yourself. Program it to lift, or to scoop, or use the magnetic pickup.
What's this? Way to go, Joe.
G.I. Joe Space-O-Matic from Hasbro.
Moving into May, America watched in horror as 28 National Guardsmen fired into a crowd of unarmed students at Ohio's Kent State University, killing 4 and wounding 9 others, leaving 1 victim permanently paralyzed.
Leave this area immediately.
The National Guard had been deployed 2 days earlier in response to escalating student protests against the Vietnam War. The Guardsmen, armed with tear gas and bayoneted rifles, first ordered the demonstrators to disperse before firing into the crowd without warning. The event sparked widespread outrage and demonstrations on college campuses across America. Ultimately, a federal court dropped all charges against the National Guard troops responsible for the shootings. The Beatles' final studio album, Let It Be, was released on May 8th. Just a few weeks after the news of their unofficial official breakup left millions of fans confused. The album, released alongside a documentary film of the same name, was met with an equally mild response, earning the group some of the most mediocre reviews of their career. Despite its lukewarm initial reception, Let It Be won the Fab Four an Academy Award for Best Original Song Score the following year.
On their behalf, thank you very much.
And has since been reappraised by fans and critics alike as the Beatles' most underrated album. The band's tense rehearsal sessions were captured on film for the documentary, and later repurposed by none other than Peter Jackson in an 8-hour documentary series about the creation of the album, titled The Beatles. Get back. Leave it to Peter Jackson to turn an 80-minute movie into an epic. Maybe one day he can do the reverse to those Hobbit movies. Staying with music, founding Fleetwood Mac guitarist Peter Green walked away from the band following a final performance on May 20th to join a German commune he discovered a few months earlier. Green had been invited to a party at the commune by model and actress Uschi Obermeier. Green decided he didn't want to leave. Bandmate Mick Fleetwood and 2 Fleetwood Mac roadies had to literally drag him away to complete the rest of their European tour.
John is, to this day, absolutely furious with these people. He called them the German jet set, and they captured Peter completely.
Hey, it was the 70s. You might wander off and join a cult was just an occupational hazard for musicians. In fact, flash forward to March of 1971, when guitarist Jeremy Spencer went out to get a magazine while Fleetwood Mac was in California to play a series of shows at the Whiskey A Go-Go and never returned. Spencer left to join the infamous Children of God cult, now known as the Family International. He remains a member to this day. That's one way to avoid the drama of making rumors.
Who do you think you're talking to? Some kid that fixes bicycles? I know every inch of the 707. Take the wings off this and you could use it as a tank. This plane is built to withstand anything, except a bad pilot.
All right, hold it. This kind of talk will get us nowhere.
In late May, Detroit Tigers outfielder Al Kaline suffered one of sport's most bizarre injuries during a game against the Milwaukee Brewers. While running to catch a fly ball, Kaline collided with teammate Jim Northrup so violently that he actually swallowed his tongue. Kaline collapsed on the field, unable to breathe. His teeth were clenched so tightly that Milwaukee's bullpen coach, Jackie Moore, was unable to force his mouth open. Luckily, left fielder and renowned slugger Willie Horton had the Hulk strength necessary to pry Kaline's jaws open and clear his airway, leaving Horton with scars on his hand. Kaline ultimately only missed one game, and Horton was presented with the Michigan Heart Association Award for his actions.
We'll be right back.
Come on, come on, come on, and taste the Pepsi way. La, la, la. Come on, come on, come on, and have a Pepsi day. You found a place to celebrate. Pepsi's cold food is great. Come on, and have a Pepsi day. You're the Pepsi generation. A Pepsi day.
On June 20th, UCLA fired Assistant Professor of Philosophy Angela Davis for the second time. This firing was for her use of inflammatory language in speeches about the handling of the People's Park rally the previous summer, in which she characterized the police as pigs and the university regents as killers and murderers.
3 weeks ago, there were pigs on the campus attacking everybody they saw.
The People's Park rally deviated from its topic of the Arab-Israeli conflict into a protest, which turned into a park takeover, in which police fired shotguns into crowds of demonstrators, ending the life of one and injuring dozens more. The college had previously terminated Davis's employment back in September of 1969 because she was a member of the Communist Party. Davis was also an activist and member of the Black Panthers, which will matter when we fast forward to October 13th, 1970, when Davis was arrested after a 2-month manhunt for her connection to the Marin County Civic Center domestic terrorist attack on August 7th. Using 3 guns owned by Davis, one of which was a shotgun she had purchased just 2 days before, 4 men took 5 hostages from a courtroom, including Superior Court Judge Harold Haley. They demanded the release of 3 black inmates who were on trial for the stabbing of a white prison guard. 3 of the kidnappers and the judge were killed. Davis spent 16 months in prison awaiting her trial, but was eventually acquitted of any crime. She continues her activism to this day.
Here we go with the top 40 hits in the nation this week on American Top 40. This is Casey Kasem in Hollywood.
The syndicated radio countdown show American Top 40 with Casey Kasem aired its first episode on the 4th of July. The show, in which Kasem counted down the top 40 Billboard singles of the week, became a staple of American culture for the next several decades.
All right, all you dream analysts, turn up the sound. Here's Eric Burden with his new group called War, and the song is called Spill the Wine.
Kasem's sonorous voice is what we think of when we hear the words Top 40 DJ. He walked so Carson Daly and Ryan Seacrest could run. Incidentally, Seacrest is the current host of American Top 40, which he took over from a retiring Kasem in 2004. In addition to the radio, you might recognize Kasem as the original voice of Shaggy on Scooby-Doo.
I'm so scared. I wish I had a ham sandwich to calm my nerves.
A character he played for roughly 40 years. A week later, Norwegian ethnologist Thor Heyerdahl completed his trip across the Atlantic, sailing from Morocco to Barbados in a raft in 57 days. The trip was an effort to prove Heyerdahl's theory that the ancient Egyptians and other ancient Mediterranean civilizations actually sailed to America and exchanged trade and culture with the people in Central and South America. Heyerdahl's raft, the Ra II, was constructed of papyrus and modeled after Egyptian sailing vessels of the period. Despite successfully completing the 4,000-mile journey, his theory is still not accepted by most anthropologists.
Well, several things have been proven. One of them is definitely that a papyrus vessel is seaworthy.
You go on a 57-day raft trip and you get nothing? That's gotta stink. The music world was shocked when Jimi Hendrix, one of rock's most towering icons, died suddenly on September 18th at the age of 27.
During his short career, Hendrix flailed his electric guitar into some of the most unusual sounds of an unusual music.
An astonishing performer whose on-stage gyrations could make Elvis Presley look like a PE teacher.
Sadly, Hendrix wouldn't be the only 27-year-old talent that would be lost in 1970. Just a few weeks later, rock legend Janis Joplin passed on October 4th at the age of 27. Joplin was in Los Angeles recording her upcoming album, Pearl, when she was found unresponsive in her hotel room after missing a recording session. The passing of both Hendrix and Joplin, coupled with the deaths of blues musician Alan Blind Owl Wilson earlier that September and Rolling Stones guitarist Brian Jones a few years earlier, marked the unofficial beginning of the infamous 27 Club. In September, some now iconic TV shows debuted.
So, here I am in Minneapolis. New life, new job. Well, not a new job yet. First I had to go on an interview at a local TV station.
The job that's open is associate producer.
I like it. Associate producer.
Mary's making new friends. Make yourself at home on Tuesday.
I painted this whole room without bothering you. It won't cost me a cent. I'm going to sell the old furniture to buy new. You won't touch anything in my room? Have I ever? You won't be...
Hey kids, Hollywood Boulevard.
If anyone had told me 4 months ago that I'd be driving an old school bus filled with my 5 children and a large dog through Hollywood, I'd have thought they were crazy.
Ladies and gentlemen, America's latest success story, The Partridge Family.
The Doors frontman Jim Morrison was convicted of indecent exposure and profanity on September 20th. The charges stemmed from a 1969 concert in Miami, during which Morrison allegedly used some swear words and may or may not have dropped his pants. Morrison was sentenced to 6 months in jail and a $500 fine for the scandalous incident. To this day, Doors bandmates maintain Morrison's pants stayed on.
This is PBS, the Public Broadcasting Service.
PBS began operations as a U.S. television network on the 5th. The nonprofit organization, dedicated to high-quality educational programming, has been the broadcast home of beloved children's shows like Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and The Magic School Bus, as well as stuffier grown-up shows like Masterpiece Theater and Downton Abbey, which have way less puppets. Gary Trudeau's satirical political comic strip Doonesbury made its debut in newspapers on October 26th. The scathingly topical cartoon became the first daily comic strip to win a Pulitzer Prize for the strip titled Stonewall, published on August 12, 1974, that took aim at the then unfolding Watergate scandal. Although Doonesbury has gone on several hiatuses, Trudeau continues to publish new strips half a century later, continuing to prove that comic strips don't have to be funny. On November 4th, the nation was stunned by the discovery of Jeannie, a 13-year-old girl who had grown up in almost total isolation.
Mr. Wiley, why did you keep your daughter in a room?
Mr. Wiley has no comment.
The abuse was so severe that Jeannie had no concept of language. When her mother finally got her out of the house, Jeannie's developmental age was similar to that of an infant's. Jeannie became a ward of the state, and although her case initially received widespread attention, she never made a significant recovery, and her current whereabouts are unknown. Tragedy struck again on November 14th when a jet carrying the Marshall University football team crashed in Canova, West Virginia. The team had been returning from a loss to East Carolina University when the plane struck some trees during its approach to the tri-state airport and crashed. Everyone on board perished, including 37 players, the coach, and 25 team boosters. The devastating loss nearly resulted in Marshall suspending its football program indefinitely. Flash forward to December 22, 2006, when the film We Are Marshall debuted. The movie stars Matthew McConaughey and a pre-MCU Anthony Mackie. Chicanery was up in the air on December 5th when the Stanley Cup, the Conn Smythe Trophy, and the Bill Masterson Trophy were all stolen during a break-in at the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto. Luckily, the Stanley Cup was only a replica, but the other 2 trophies were very real. The trophies were unceremoniously returned just a few weeks later, when the thieves left them in the driveway of a Toronto police officer, after discovering that as far as ransom goes, the trophies were basically worthless. One of the oddest meetings in White House history occurred on December 21st, when Elvis Presley paid President Richard Nixon a visit in the Oval Office. The king of rock and roll dropped in on Nixon to offer his services as an anti-drug spokesman, showing up at the White House gates unannounced. The Secret Service didn't bother to search the king. If they had, they would have discovered the antique Colt 45 pistol Presley carried inside, which he presented to Nixon as a gift. It's good to be king, just for a while. The famous photograph of their strange conversation is the single most requested image from the National Archives. And that's how 1970 ended, with a historic meeting of two rulers, neither of whom would reign much longer. 1971 was right around the corner, bringing the demise of several more musical icons and the conviction of one of the 20th century's most notorious criminals. And Dirty Harry would begin patrolling cinema streets. Geez, the 70s need to lighten up. But that is for next year. Coming soon, 1971. The 70s got off to a rough start. 1971 was still bogged down with tragedy, civil unrest, and sinister omens of the years to come. But there was still plenty of time for some classic records, some unlikely new television heroes, and the second coming of the happiest place on earth. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. Get ready for the end of one crime of the century and the beginning of another, because this episode, we're talking 1971. Now time to give all those other years the hairy eye and get down with 1971.
It marks, as we like to say, the end of an era.
The ban on television and radio ads for cigarettes, signed by President Nixon the previous year, went into effect on New Year's Day, bidding a fond farewell to the days of Fred Flintstone taking long, flavorful drags off a carton of Winston's.
I got a better idea. Let's take a Winston break. Winston's got that filter blend.
4 days later, former heavyweight champ Sonny Liston was discovered in his home by his wife Geraldine. Although his death was ruled an accidental overdose, there were signs of a possible struggle, and questions about what may have really happened remain to this day. A legendary figure in boxing, ironically, Liston's most famous fight was a 7th-round loss in 1964, when the heavily favored champion lost his title to an up-and-comer named Cassius Clay.
They might be stopping it. That might be all, ladies and gentlemen. Get up there, Joe. Get up there. Get up in the ring.
From Television City in Hollywood.
Boy, the way Glenn Miller played.
Songs that made the hit parade.
Guys like us, we had it made. Those were the days.
Charles Manson and 3 girl members of his so-called family all were found guilty of murder in the first degree.
The end of January closed the book on one of the 20th century's most notorious crimes, when Charles Manson was convicted of his involvement in the Tate LaBianca murders on January 25th. Manson and 3 of his followers, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, were sentenced to death for the brutal slayings that took the lives of 6 people. But their sentences were reduced to life in prison following a temporary ban on capital punishment in the state of California. Manson famously modeled part of his twisted worldview on the lyrics to the Beatles' song Helter Skelter. Wonder how hard he took the Fab Four's breakup. A similar fate awaited Manson's 4th co-conspirator later that year, when Tex Watson was convicted of 7 counts of first-degree homicide on October 12th. Watson had been tried separately after fleeing to Texas and fighting extradition for several months following his arrest. Tex is currently serving a life sentence. Elsewhere in crime and punishment, NYPD officer Frank Serpico was shot during a bust on February 3rd. Despite being severely wounded, his fellow officers refused to radio for help, and a random civilian called the ambulance that ultimately saved his life. Serpico had gained notoriety as a whistleblower calling out police corruption, and his shooting became a national news story as details came out suggesting Serpico's fellow officers tried to off him in retaliation. It became such a story that it was made into a movie 2 years later, starring Al Pacino as the hero cop.
I'm an officer! I'm a police officer! Jesus, Frank, how was I supposed to recognize you?
Believe it or not, J.C. Penney was a real guy, and he kicked off the affordably priced bucket on February 12th. James Cash Penney founded the department store chain in 1902 in Kemmerer, Wyoming, and stayed involved with the company until his passing at the ripe old age of 95. According to popular legend, he once personally trained a young employee the most efficient way to gift wrap packages. The employee's name? Sam Walton, the future founder of Walmart. Vice President and future Nixon fall guy, Spiro Agnew injured 2 people after hitting 2 tee shots into the crowd during a golf game the day before Valentine's Day. Agnew was playing a foursome with pro golfer Doug Sanders, screen legend Bob Hope, and baseball great Willie Mays. More on Willie later. The vice president sliced his first shot of the day and struck an elderly man and his wife. Then he teed up his second shot and sliced again, this time hitting a woman in the ankle and sending her to the hospital. Agnew managed to play the rest of the game without injuring anyone else. But nailing 3 spectators with 2 consecutive tee shots is admittedly kind of impressive. This incident of weaponized vice presidents wouldn't be topped until 34 years later, when Dick Cheney shot a 78-year-old lawyer in the face during a hunting trip. Luckily, the man's injuries weren't serious, because no one could agree on how much beer had been present at the time of the incident.
Butterfield, are you aware of the installation of any listening devices in the Oval Office of the President?
A day after the golfing incident, Nixon had a secret taping system installed in the White House. Nixon had grown increasingly paranoid and demanded constant surveillance of every conversation that took place in the Oval Office, his executive office, and his office at Camp David, as well as several phone lines. It was the beginning of the Watergate scandal, which will continue to play out in the next episode. No spoilers.
The Watergate scandal became a whole new ballgame.
Moving into March, the Doors frontman Jim Morrison left the United States for the last time on March 11th. Morrison packed his bags and left for Paris. The Lizard King was trying to avoid a Miami jail sentence stemming from his indecent exposure conviction the previous September. The story of one of rock's most iconic performers would end just a few short months later, when Morrison passed away in the City of Light on July 3rd at age 27. The 1970s had another member to the infamous 27 Club. Morrison's official cause of death was heart failure, although no autopsy was performed. 2 weeks after Morrison left on his ill-fated trip, late-night king Ed Sullivan aired the final episode of his hugely influential variety show.
By the reception here, you've been fine. Now get home safely. Good night.
The final episode of The Ed Sullivan Show went out over the airwaves on March 28th. Sullivan helped launch the careers of some of the 20th century's biggest entertainment legends, including Elvis, the Beatles, and Michael Jackson. Not a bad run, if you could only have held out for Billie Eilish.
When did you people start getting so interested in black folks?
How many men were in the ambush?
You offered pretty good news to me, slapping up on some white cops.
I want them, do you hear? And I want them now.
We'll be right back.
What are you doing here?
I'm going to take your picture.
I can't come down. I'm studying.
Well, that's okay. I can take it from here.
The new Kodak Teleinstamatic camera.
National Public Radio, or NPR, aired its first broadcast a month later, on April 27th. The not-for-profit radio news organization was created by Congress's Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, which determined that it was in the public interest for the government to encourage the growth and development of non-profit informational, educational, and cultural broadcasting. Just a few weeks later, NPR broadcast the first episode of its flagship newscast, All Things Considered, which still airs to this day, Monday through Friday.
You know what I think I'm going to do then? Just for the hell of it.
Tell me.
I'm going to take this right foot, and I'm going to whop you on that side of your face.
Really?
Really?
On May 21st, Marvin Gaye released his landmark album, What's Going On? The soulful concept album is told from the point of view of a veteran returning home from the Vietnam War to a country rife with intolerance and injustice, and featured hit songs like Mercy, Mercy Me, Inner City Blues, and the title track, What's Going On? The album was partially inspired by letters Gaye received from his brother Frankie, who was drafted at age 25. What's Going On has been hailed by both critics and musicians alike as one of the best albums ever recorded.
What's going on? What's going on?
Just a few short months after watching the vice president devastate some unsuspecting voters at a golf game, baseball legend Willie Mays hit his 638th career home run with the San Francisco Giants.
There's a swing, a long drive to deep left center field, and you can kill it. Bye-bye, baby!
Setting the National League record of 1,950 runs scored on May 30th. Mays had turned 40 earlier that month and had started playing for the Giants back in 1951, but his time in San Francisco and in Major League Baseball was winding down. Mays would be traded to the New York Mets, where he finished out his iconic career a year later. Returning to the world of music, about 1,000 Grateful Dead fans drank apple cider spiked with LSD during a concert on May 31st. Whoopsies! And presumably took a long, strange trip to the venue's bathroom. A little over 30 concert-goers got themselves checked out at a nearby hospital, but no one was hospitalized by the incident. So if Ben and/or Jerry is watching, they might get an idea for a new ingredient to spice up Cherry Garcia.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm Jerry.
And LSD ice cream is very powerful stuff.
Where are my manners? I didn't even introduce myself to you gentlemen. My name is John Shaft. Freeze.
The day after Independence Day, President Nixon ratified the 26th Amendment, which lowered the legal voting age from 21 to 18. The amendment was partially in response to criticism of the Vietnam War, in which the average American serviceman was 19 years old. The slogan, "Old enough to fight, old enough to vote," became a popular chant for activists leading up to the amendment. The following day, music legend Louis Armstrong passed away at age 69. After a career spanning nearly 50 years, the jazz trumpeter's trademark gravelly singing voice remains one of the most recognized in the history of popular music. And his signature hit, What a Wonderful World, is still in regular rotation, ironically, often in depressing movie montages. Moving into August, the summer came to a close with the death of SeaWorld's flagship performer, Shamu the Killer Whale. In case you never did the math yourself, SeaWorld's famed mascot Shamu isn't one impossibly elderly killer whale, but actually a name given to several different orcas over the years. The original Shamu was a female captured as a juvenile and sold to SeaWorld in 1966, but Shamu experienced a rapid and shocking decline in the months leading up to her death. On April 20th, Shamu attacked a SeaWorld employee named Ann Godsey during a televised stunt, grabbing the woman in her jaws and repeatedly dragging her underwater. It was a harrowing incident that would be echoed decades later. In February 2010, when SeaWorld trainer Don Brancho was attacked and killed by a 12,000-pound orca named Tilikum during a performance. The attack was the basis for the 2013 documentary Blackfish. Just over 2 weeks later, prisoners seized control of the maximum security Attica Correctional Facility outside of Buffalo, New York. Over 1,200 inmates captured an exercise yard and held 39 guards and prison employees hostage for 4 days, until Governor Nelson A. Rockefeller finally instructed state police to retake the prison by force. When the dust settled, of the 39 inmates and hostages who died, all but 4 were slain by police gunfire, and 89 others were injured.
The 4-day insurrection at New York's Attica State Prison came to a tragic end this morning. Negotiations gave way to force, making this the bloodiest prison incident the country has seen in 4 decades.
On the same day as Attica, former Beatle John Lennon released his album Imagine. The album was both a critical and commercial hit, earning the #1 spot on the Billboard charts and a double platinum certification, selling over 2 million copies. The title track would go on to become Lennon's best-selling song as a solo artist, and one of the most celebrated pop songs of the past half-century. 2 days later, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev passed away. As the leader of the Soviet Union during the first decade of the Cold War, Khrushchev attempted to adopt a policy of peaceful coexistence with the United States, which did not earn him much love back home. Although he did famously bang his shoe on a table at a meeting of the United Nations to get everyone's attention, surely that deserves some love. Khrushchev was forced to resign in 1964 after the embarrassment of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and spent the rest of his life in disgrace and isolation.
No, usually we meet in the lobby. We discuss the film there, and I record their comments. That's all.
Oh, you do it in the lobby?
Yes.
Oh, fine.
Heading into October, the happiest place on Earth opened its doors for a second time, when Walt Disney World officially admitted its first guest in Orlando, Florida on October 1st. The resort opened with just the Magic Kingdom, but half a century later, the assorted parks and attractions cover almost 25,000 acres of Florida swampland. The very first guests to be admitted to Walt Disney World were the Windsor family, who were given a lifetime pass for free admission. The cost of a ticket back then was $3.50 for adults and $1 for kids under 12. Compared to $109 per day in 2022. Those lifetime passes turned out to be a pretty sweet deal.
Hey there and welcome aboard. You're right on time for another super slick ride on the Soul Train. We'll get rolling with the exciting stylistics right after this communication.
We'll be right back.
Now, from Milton Bradley, a weird game, Voice of the Mummy. Press the button. From within the tomb, the mummy speaks. Look out.
All right, Popeye's here. Get your hands on your heads. Get off the bar and get on the wall. Come on, move out. All right, come on. Face the window. Move. Face the wall. Turn around there. Turn around. Move.
Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice's famous musical Jesus Christ Superstar debuted on Broadway October 12th. The musical is a loose retelling of the gospel as a tongue-in-cheek rock opera, so it didn't generate any controversy whatsoever. Before they became the 2 biggest names in musical theater, Weber and Rice were unable to secure funding to produce Jesus Christ Superstar as a show, so they released it as a concept album that generated enough buzz to finally land them on Broadway. The show was a smash hit and held the record for the longest-running musical in London's West End until it lost the title to Weber's 1981 musical, Cats.
Game 4, the first night game in World Series history.
In a surprising first, the first ever night game of the World Series was played on October 13th between the Baltimore Orioles and the Pittsburgh Pirates at Pittsburgh's Three Rivers Stadium. Night games had been a thing for several decades at that point, so why did it take so long to bring the World Series to prime time? In short, like with most decisions in Major League Baseball, it was a question of tradition. Bucking that tradition paid off. The game drew an estimated 63 million viewers, the largest audience ever for a nighttime sporting event. The end of October sadly claimed another rock and roll icon when Duane Allman of the Allman Brothers Band tragically perished in a motorcycle crash on October 29th. Skydog was driving along a highway in Macon, Georgia, when he lost control and collided with a truck. The title and artwork of the Allman Brothers Band's 1972 album, Eat a Peach, is both a reference to a quote from Duane Allman and the circumstances of his tragic accident. In an eerily ironic twist, just over 1 year later, the band's bass player, Barry Oakley, would fatally crash his own motorcycle into the side of a city bus in Macon, not far from the site of Duane Allman's accident. The Los Angeles Lakers began their historic 33-game winning streak November 5th, defeating the Baltimore Bullets, now the Washington Wizards, 110-106. Led by NBA greats like Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West, the team went on an epic 2-month tear that remains both a league record and the longest undefeated streak in American professional sports. Pop icon Cher scored her first solo hit when Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves reached #1 on the Billboard charts November 6th. Although she's gone on record in recent years as not thinking much of the song herself, it was an undeniable smash that revived her career as a solo artist. Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves shipped over 1 million copies in the U.S., earning it a gold certification and making it the best-selling single in the history of MCA Records at the time. Sticking with music, British rock group Led Zeppelin released their fourth untitled album, generally referred to as Led Zeppelin 4, 2 days later. In addition to being the band's highest-selling album, Led Zeppelin 4 is notable for containing Stairway to Heaven, the group's signature hit and one of the most famous classic rock songs of all time. So famous, Mike Myers wasn't allowed to play it.
No stairway. Denied.
3 days later, counterculture icon and godfather of gonzo journalism, Hunter S. Thompson published the first part of his signature work, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, in Rolling Stone magazine. The serialized novel, which follows Thompson on a drug-fueled bender while attending a race on assignment for Sports Illustrated, is a chaotic blend of fact and fiction that also serves as a post-mortem of the hippie movement of the 1960s. The book was a hit, and while several attempts were made to adapt it into a film over the years, a movie wouldn't be released until 27 years later, when surreal filmmaker and Monty Python alumnus Terry Gilliam successfully adapted Thompson's work into the 1998 film of the same name, starring Johnny Depp as Thompson.
Wait! We can't stop here. This is bad country.
One of the most enduring mysteries of American crime went down the night of November 24th, when a man calling himself D.B. Cooper hijacked Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 heading from Portland to Seattle. Shortly into the flight, Cooper gave flight attendants a note claiming he had a bomb and would detonate it if he didn't receive a hefty ransom. After briefly landing the plane to collect $200,000 in ransom money, Cooper parachuted out of the rear of the plane mid-flight and was never seen again. More than half a century later, he has never been conclusively identified. Maybe he was just really freaked out about going home for Thanksgiving.
We'll be right back.
The French have their Roquefort, the Dutch their Edam, but in America, the cheese is Cracker Barrel. Cracker Barrel brand cheddar from Kraft.
Moving into December, the Soviet space probe Mars 3 became the first spacecraft to soft land on the surface of the red planet on the 2nd of December. For reference, a soft landing is essentially the opposite of a crash landing. The probe touched down on December 2nd in the middle of a massive dust storm. 9 days after its sister probe, Mars 2, crash landed on the planet. Although the lander failed shortly into the mission, the Mars 3 orbiter continued to circle the planet and transmit data and images back to Earth for the next 8 months. 8 days later, musician Frank Zappa failed to achieve orbit when a deranged fan shoved him off the stage during a performance at London's Rainbow Theatre on December 10th. Zappa was in the middle of a cover of the Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand when the fan rushed on stage and threw him off. He suffered serious injuries that left him confined to a wheelchair for over a year. Recalling the incident in his 1989 autobiography, The Real Frank Zappa Book, Zappa wrote, "The band thought I was dead." Just a few days earlier, a fan fired a flare gun during one of Zappa's performances and set fire to the Montreux Casino in Geneva, Switzerland. The fire inspired Deep Purple, who were performing with Zappa that night, to write their signature song, Smoke on the Water. On the same day as the Zappa attack, an unknown filmmaker named George Lucas unwittingly made history when he founded his production company, Lucasfilm, in San Rafael, California. Before it became known as a workshop of dreams beloved by every adolescent action figure collector, Lucasfilm was a decidedly small operation. At the time, the creator of Star Wars and Indiana Jones had only the dystopian sci-fi film THX 1138 under his belt, and was still a few years away from changing movies forever with his blockbuster space opera. Flash forward to 40 years later, when Lucas would sell Lucasfilm to the Walt Disney Company to the tune of $4 billion. That's a lot of power converters.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
And that's how 1971 came to a close, with a Droog and a Jedi giving us a glimpse of the new wave of movies about to strike Hollywood. 1972 was on its way, with an exciting new hobby from a video game company, and the most infamous political scandal of the 20th century. Also, a certain marble-mouthed leading man would make us all an offer we couldn't refuse. But that's for next year. Coming soon, 1972.
Hiya, Cass.
Hiya, John.
How you doing?
Fine and dandy.
I'm great, too.
I didn't ask you how you were.
Pop culture was out of sight in 1972. TV saw the beginning of a New Year's tradition and the premiere of one of the most popular dramas of all time. Radios and record stores received several funky new albums that would continue shifting popular music from the sound of the 60s into fresh new territory. Electronic entertainment gained its first real foothold. Sports history was made more than once by an exciting new generation of athletes. And one of the greatest movies of all time was released in theaters.
It's not personal, son. It's strictly business.
But the year was also buggin'. Political unrest continued around the globe, and every American old enough to watch the nightly news would learn more about an elite Washington, D.C. building complex than they knew about their own grandmothers. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports, and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. Settle in for some historic news, because today we're talking 1972. Now it's time to freak out in a Moon Age daydream.
And now I'm lost in that daydream, yeah.
The year would start off with a fox.
Hello, police. I want to report a robbery.
How many men were there? 4. 4? That too many? No, if that's it. Were they colored? Yeah, white.
Mid-January would have a surprising new footnote to the Second World War, when a Japanese soldier was discovered hiding out on Guam nearly 3 decades after Japan's surrender. When U.S. forces recaptured the island from Japanese control in 1944, Sergeant Soichi Yokoi had disappeared into the jungle rather than surrender. And there he remained, living off the land for 28 years. When Yokoi was discovered by locals and given the long overdue news about the end of the war, he returned home to Japan as a national hero. On Sunday, January 30th, 13 unarmed demonstrators in Londonderry, Northern Ireland, were cut down by British Army paratroopers in an incident that would become known as Bloody Sunday. The demonstrators were part of a march protesting the British government's policy of arresting and imprisoning anyone suspected of being an Irish nationalist. The government declared the march unlawful and sent the army to confront the demonstrators. This was one of the most significant events of the Troubles, the period of Irish nationalists orchestrating violent campaigns to force Great Britain to free Ireland from its rule. Moving into February, Canadian folk rock musician Neil Young released his signature album, Harvest, on the 1st. Harvest contains collaborations with a number of major artists like Linda Ronstadt, David Crosby, and James Taylor, and went on to become the best-selling album of the year, and the biggest of Young's career. The lead single, Heart of Gold, sold over 1 million copies and remains Young's only #1 hit in the U.S. Not a bad harvest for the soulful Canuck.
This was Germany in the early 30s. This was Sally Bowles in the early 30s, full of life
I love parties. Doesn't my body drive you wild with desire?
and love.
I may have my tiny faults. God damn it, I'm gonna have a baby!
Sally is rather knowledgeable in these areas.
Does it really matter as long as you're having fun?
Every night at the Royale Theater, the 50s come to life. Grease.
The musical Grease opened on Broadway for the first time on Valentine's Day, starring Barry Bostwick and Carol Demas as teen lovers Danny and Sandy. The musical received 7 Tony Award nominations and ran for nearly 4,000 performances, featuring notable replacement actors like Richard Gere, Patrick Swayze, Adrienne Barbeau, Peter Gallagher, and John Travolta. Travolta would retain the role of Danny in the film version, which hit theaters 6 years later, on June 16, 1978. The film made household names out of Travolta and his co-star Olivia Newton-John. Shifting gears from the world of hot-rodding teens to the world of sports, Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain became the first NBA player to score 30,000 points on February 16th. Ironically, despite his legendary status as a scorer, both on and off the court, Chamberlain only put up 10 points the day he made basketball history. 5 days later, Richard Nixon became the first U.S. president to visit the People's Republic of China on February 21st.
We seek an open world, a world in which no people, great or small, will live in angry isolation.
Nixon's visit was hailed as a strategic move to drive a wedge between China and the Soviet Union, which had been more heavily supporting North Vietnam during the Vietnam War.
You found paradise in America. Had a good trade, made a good living, police protected you, and there were courts of law. I want you to rest well, and a month from now, this Hollywood big shot's gonna give you what you want.
Too late. They start shooting in a week.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
Coming back to Nixon, the president's administration had former Beatles frontman John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono served with deportation papers in mid-March. The Nixon administration argued that Lennon was in the country illegally.
And immigration's policy has always been not to split a family. So they're saying that seeing as Mr. Lennon is not eligible because I was bussed in England in 1968, planted by the way, both better get out.
But because Nixon is gonna Nixon, the deportation order more to do with the singer's criticism of the Nixon administration and America's involvement in the Vietnam War. A number of celebrities and public figures wrote statements petitioning the Immigration and Naturalization Service to allow Lennon and Ono to remain in the country, including Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, John Updike, Joyce Carol Oates, and Tony Curtis. 70s heartthrob Burt Reynolds created what would become one of the internet's most famous images for the April 1972 issue of Cosmopolitan magazine. The man who defined macho for an entire generation kicked back on a bearskin rug wearing nothing but a twinkle in his eye, and that world-famous mustache. Reynolds claimed he had been drinking the morning of the shoot and was, in his own words, plastered by the time he posed for the legendary photo. No word on how much the bear had to drink.
We'll be right back.
Bowling sure makes me hot and thirsty.
This is a job for Kool-Aid.
Hey, Kool-Aid!
Oh yeah, Kool-Aid's here, bringing you fun. Kool-Aid's got thirst on the run. Get a big, wide, happy ear to hear Kool-Aid smile. 'Cause the biggest smile is a Kool-Aid smile.
Your friend's cool.
My friend's Kool-Aid.
Mobster Joe Gallo was gunned down in the middle of his 43rd birthday party at a restaurant in New York City's Little Italy neighborhood on April 7th.
At least 14 persons witnessed the killing, including Gallo's wife, a bride of 3 weeks.
Gallo, an alleged member of the Colombo crime family, had gained a reputation as a wild man, earning him the nickname Crazy Joe. Notorious mob enforcer Frank Sheeran, aka the Irishman, later claimed responsibility for whacking Gallo, but his claim has been disputed by some investigators and witnesses. To this day, Gallo's murder officially remains unsolved, although Sheeran's version of events was depicted in the 2019 Martin Scorsese film The Irishman. Moving into May and the other side of the law, famed FBI boss and future Leonardo DiCaprio facial prosthetic J. Edgar Hoover passed away.
J. Edgar Hoover was one of the giants. His long life brimmed over with magnificent achievement and dedicated service to this country, which he loved so well.
Hoover served as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for nearly 50 years. But Hoover became a controversial figure toward the end of his career, in particular for his widespread surveillance of American citizens suspected of being communists or communist sympathizers.
Is there any communists back here?
Congress passed a law requiring all future FBI directors to be approved by the Senate and serve no longer than 10 years. Speaking of controversy, Alabama Governor George Wallace was seriously wounded in an assassination attempt on May 15th. Wallace, who staunchly opposed desegregation and famously stood on the steps of the enrollment office of the University of Alabama, blocking 2 black students from entering when the school was racially integrated in 1963. Wallace was attending a campaign rally in Laurel, Maryland, when he was shot by 21-year-old Arthur Bremer, leaving Wallace permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Wallace was re-elected as Alabama's governor 2 more times, finally ending his political career in 1982 as one of the longest-serving governors in American history. The Philadelphia Phillies' Greg Luzinski pulled off a historic shot of his own a day later, when he belted a home run out of Phillies Veterans Stadium that struck the replica Liberty Bell atop the bleachers in center field. The bell was parked at the highest point of the stadium, some 500 feet away from home plate. No wonder Luzinski was nicknamed the Bull. The end of a different era was underway 2 weeks later, when White House plumbers first broke into the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. on May 28th. These plumbers were a group of ex-FBI and CIA led by former FBI agent G. Gordon Liddy, who broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate complex to plant recording devices, ostensibly to gather information that would help Nixon in his upcoming re-election campaign. We'll see in a minute how the president couldn't leave well enough alone. David Bowie's groundbreaking album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, was released 9 days later on June 6th. A concept album loosely telling the story of an extraterrestrial rock star messiah who let fame go to his head, Ziggy Stardust was part album and part performance art.
I wanted to define the archetype messiah rock star. That's all I wanted to do. And I used the trappings of kabuki theater, mime technique, fringe New York music, like my references were Velvet Underground.
Bowie created a Ziggy alter ego he would embody during live shows for the next 18 months. The album made Bowie a bona fide superstar and is considered to be among his finest work, as well as one of the best and most influential rock records of all time.
The Democratic National Committee is trying to solve a spy mystery. It began before dawn Saturday when 5 intruders were captured by police inside the offices of the committee in Washington.
Among the 5 men was former CIA agent James W. McCord Jr., who was then serving as the security coordinator for Nixon's re-election committee. The men were discovered with burglary tools, recording equipment, several cameras, and actual tear gas guns, in case they needed to take out Spectre, I guess. However, President Nixon announced that a White House investigation had determined that no part of his administration had been involved with the break-in, and that the men had acted independently.
The easiest course would be for me to blame those to whom I delegated the responsibility to run the campaign. But that would be a cowardly thing to do.
His version of the story would go unchallenged for about a month. More on that in a bit. Electrical engineers Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney took the first step toward dooming the productivity of future generations when they founded Atari Inc. on June 27th in Sunnyvale, California. Bushnell and Dabney had recently designed the first arcade video game, Computer Space, in 1971, and were looking to continue producing electronic games. The company's name comes from the Japanese word Atari, which Bushnell selected because of its use in the ancient board game Go. 4 days later, the first official UK Gay Pride rally was held in London on July 1st. The date was chosen to mark the anniversary of the Stonewall riots, which had ignited after police raided the popular gay club The Stonewall Inn in New York City on June 28, 1969. Approximately 2,000 people attended the rally. Today, Pride in London continues to run annual festivals celebrating diversity in the LGBTQ community as one of the largest and longest-running Pride events in the world. In the world of sports, tennis icon Billie Jean King won her 8th Grand Slam singles title at Wimbledon on July 7th. It was one of 3 Grand Slam singles victories King earned that year, which probably had something to do with Sports Illustrated naming her Sportsperson of the Year, alongside college basketball coach John Wooden in their December 25th issue. King was the first woman to win the award. Later that month, a staggering 57 homicides were committed in New York City over a 7-day period that ended at midnight on July 20th. That staggering number was a record for the city at the time, which had reported an average weekly homicide toll of 31 the previous year. Investigators theorized that a combination of a sweltering heat wave, payday, and random chance may have contributed to the unusually high number of homicides, which included 26 stabbings, a genuine mob hit, and an incineration. Yep, you heard that one right. That was a bad week to be awake in the city that never sleeps.
We'll be right back.
What's this stuff? Some cereal. It's supposed to be good for you. Did you try it? I'm not gonna try it. You try it. I'm not gonna try it. Let's get Mikey. Yeah. He won't eat it. He hates everything. He likes it. Hey, Mikey.
When you bring life home, don't tell the kids it's one of those nutritional cereals you've been trying to get them to eat. You're the only one who has to know.
Well, the system's done all right by me.
Why do you go on these trips with me, Ed?
I like my life, Lewis.
Got a nice job, a nice house, nice kid.
Make that sound rather shitty, Lewis.
Yeah, but why do you go on these trips with me?
Sticking with crime, Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein published their first article investigating the Watergate scandal on August 1st. The pair reported that a check for $25,000 originally intended for Nixon's re-election campaign had been deposited into the account of one of the Watergate burglars arrested for the break-in. Considering Nixon had emphatically stated that no one in his administration had any knowledge of the break-in, the deposit was admittedly hard to explain. And, what's that word? Oh yeah, suspicious. Woodward and Bernstein would continue investigating the Watergate break-in for the next 2 years. Later that month, John Lennon played his final full public concert on August 30th. Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono mostly performed songs from their latest album, Sometime in New York. But the rascally Beatles snuck in a Beatleless rendition of Come Together, as well as his signature hit Imagine. Paul McCartney had been invited to attend as well, but ultimately turned the offer down.
This is a CBS News special report. Terror at the Olympics.
Just 6 days later, members of a Palestinian terrorist group known as Black September laid siege to the Olympic Village apartment of Israeli athletes competing in the 1972 Summer Games at Munich. The terrorists murdered 2 athletes and took 9 others hostage, demanding the release of over 230 Arab prisoners incarcerated in Israeli jails. All of the hostages were slain in a shootout at the Munich airport, along with 5 of the terrorists and a German police officer. Rather than canceling the games entirely, the decision was made to suspend competition for 24 hours to hold memorial services for the Israeli athletes. In response to the siege, the Israeli government sent a team of Mossad agents to track down and eliminate the Black September terrorists responsible. Flash forward 33 years, when Steven Spielberg's film Munich, a dramatization of the siege and the subsequent revenge mission, was released on December 23, 2005. September would see the start of some now famous TV series.
It's the trial. I have to be there at 10 tomorrow.
Daddy, how can you be so oppressive?
That's the older generation's answer to everything.
You see, today is Sunday. Not that I'm a religious man, but I feel on this day of worship, it would be wrong to strangle your children.
Big important thing in your career that's happened to you? I mean, with this kind of
aside from
exposure?
Grease was the musical that I
Right.
did on Broadway, which sort of led to Maude, and Maude's the first television thing I've ever done.
I've heard about you. I've heard about your lovemaking.
That's nothing.
That's what I heard.
Then hold it, Carol. Come on, honey. Can't you put a little more pizzazz in it? I mean, this is a tribute to burlesque, not the Walton.
Quiet down now and get some sleep.
Good night, Daddy. Good night, Elizabeth.
Good night, John Boy. Good night, Jim Bob. Good night, Jim Bob.
Good night, Jim Bob.
At ease, man. McIntyre. Yeah. What's in here?
Soot, sir.
Be the judge of that.
Heading into October, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, carrying the Old Christians Club rugby team and several of their family members and friends, crashed into the Andes Mountains. The survivors were stranded in the freezing mountains for the next 72 days, huddling in the plane's fuselage for shelter and melting snow for drinking water. To not starve, survivors were forced to consume the remains of those who had perished during the crash or later succumbed to the elements. The group began to lose hope as their numbers tragically dwindled, until December 23rd. when rescue helicopters finally arrived. The story of the team's incredible ordeal spending over 2 months in the frozen wilderness was the inspiration for the 1993 film Alive, starring Ethan Hawke and Josh Hamilton, who are extremely not from Uruguay.
The paper covers the rock. The rock crushes the scissors.
Is not playing a child's game a waste of time?
In games, children teach, sometimes more than books. Calm. Instruct an old man.
We now go to Miami, where Polaroid unveiled the world's first truly instant camera on October 26th.
And now, a compact, folding, electronically controlled, motor-driven, single-lens reflex camera, capable of focusing from infinity down to 10 inches.
The SX70 reduced the development process to a single step. Just click the button to take your shot, and the camera took care of the rest, spitting out a square photograph that developed in seconds right before your eyes. The square images and development process have since become synonymous with the phrase, taking a Polaroid. On the same day as Polaroid's debut, the National Park Service began the first guided tours of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, the infamous maximum security prison located on San Francisco's Alcatraz Island. The prison still operates as a museum and tourist attraction to this day, and several former guards and inmates alike have worked there. Although there were a handful of attempts, nobody ever successfully escaped the island in the 3 decades that it operated as a federal prison, except for Sean Connery.
Welcome to the Rock.
Richard Nixon was re-elected as the President of the United States in a historic landslide victory.
Some or all of the polls have closed now in a dozen states, and the early returns put President Nixon, as expected, out in front and by a sizable margin.
Despite the growing stain of the Watergate scandal, Nixon won 49 out of 50 states, completely obliterating George McGovern.
Never known a national election when I would be able to go to bed earlier than tonight.
Nixon wouldn't be able to enjoy the sweet taste of success for long, though. Even though he'd just earned another 4-year term as Commander-in-Chief, his days in the White House were numbered.
We'll be right back.
Intimate by Revlon. Diamond Facet Spray Mist. How'd you know? An intimate teddy bear. He looks just like you. Basket of Intimate. Did he give me Intimate because I like it, or because he likes it?
Ho, ho, ho. Give her something intimate. It's really a man's fragrance. Intimate by Revlon.
5 short months after starting the company, Atari co-founder Nolan Bushnell released the revolutionary video game Pong at the end of November. Essentially a stripped-down version of table tennis, the game was initially designed by Atari engineer Alan Alcorn as an exercise. But after installing a prototype machine at Andy Capp's Tavern in Sunnyvale, California, Pong became an instant success. The game is credited with launching the video game industry, making it partially responsible for why you have to wait so long for a new Timeline episode. These video games do not play themselves. The coldness of December would hit on the 7th, as First Lady of the Philippines and noted shoe collector Imelda Marcos was stabbed in an assassination attempt. Marcos was presenting awards for a national beautification campaign when a man emerged from the crowd and attacked her. The assailant was taken out by police on the spot, but Marcos suffered severe damage to her arms and hands and had to be flown to a hospital to recover. Imelda's husband, President of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, had placed the country under martial law in September.
I signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law,
effectively transforming the Philippines into a dictatorship under his rule. That rule would last until February 26, 1986, when the Marcoses fled the presidential palace in Manila after trying to overturn election results. Evidence of the president's widespread corruption quickly emerged, including the embezzlement of billions from the Philippine economy. Hey, 3,000 pairs of shoes ain't cheap. Sadly, the good vibes felt by Pittsburgh sports fans wouldn't last when Pittsburgh Pirates all-star right fielder Roberto Clemente tragically perished in a plane crash on December 31st. Clemente was on his way to personally deliver relief supplies to Nicaragua, which had been struck by a devastating earthquake the week before. Unfortunately, the plane was in disrepair and overloaded, and it exploded just after taking off from Puerto Rico's International Airport. The National Baseball Hall of Fame amended their eligibility requirements to posthumously induct Clemente the following year, and renamed its annual Commissioner's Award to the Roberto Clemente Award. 1972 came to a close with the first ever broadcast of New Year's Rocking Eve with Dick Clark. Surprisingly, the inaugural broadcast was actually titled Three Dog Nights New Year's Rocking Eve and was hosted by members of the psychedelic rock band rather than Clark, who served more of a field reporter's position covering the ball drop ceremony in Times Square.
Let me wish you Happy New Year, fellas. If you think it's wild out there, it's beginning to pour here in Times Square.
The show was a success and became an annual television tradition for the next 40 years. Clark only missed one broadcast in 4 decades, hosting his final installment on December 31st, 2011, before passing away the following April at age 82. And so 1972 came to a close, with one icon taking flight for the last time and another counting down for the first. But turn that frown upside down, cousin. 1973 is just around the bend, bringing more of the classic flicks, righteous tunes, and freaky-deaky scandals that made the decade unique. But that's for next year. Coming soon, 1973. 1973 started off with some much-needed good vibes. The end of a long and bloody war was finally in sight, and America took the space race to a stellar new level. Plus, there were some seriously nifty records to spin. But by the end of the year, everyone was running on fumes. Literally. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports, and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. Settle in for some historic news because today we're talking 1973. Now, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon, or the end of the episode, whichever comes first. This is 1973. The year would start off with a little schoolhouse rock.
It's Schoolhouse Rocking, a chip off the block of your favorite schoolhouse rock.
Sticking with catchy tunes, Elvis made history with his Aloha from Hawaii concert event on January 14th. The hour-long show was broadcast live via satellite from Honolulu International Center, today known as the Neil S. Blaisdell Center, to approximately 36 countries in Asia and the Oceania region. The concert was the first live satellite broadcast featuring a single performer. It also held the record for sweatiest human on television until Jimmy Swaggart gave his infamous "I have sinned" speech 15 years later.
I have sinned against you, my Lord.
The very next day, President Richard Nixon announced the United States had suspended all offensive actions against North Vietnam. The announcements came just weeks after Nixon bombarded North Vietnam with a 2-week bombing campaign, during which American forces dropped over 20,000 tons of ordnance on Haiphong and Hanoi. 2 weeks later, the U.S. signed the Paris Peace Accords with North Vietnam, the Viet Cong, and South Vietnam on January 27th. The agreement called for an immediate ceasefire across Vietnam, and for the United States to begin withdrawing its forces and dismantling its bases. In return, North Vietnam agreed to release their prisoners of war, including every captive American.
Today, the largest contingents of repatriated prisoners so far, 60 men, were flown from Clark to Travis Air Force Base, California.
It was effectively the end of the U.S.'s involvement in the Vietnam War.
I'm gonna give you 4 hours to get away, and then I'm coming after you. 4 hours, don't waste any more precious time.
Lean, mean, knockout-producing hitting machine George Foreman defeated heavyweight champion Joe Frazier at the Sunshine Showdown in Kingston, Jamaica on January 22nd. Foreman, the 3-1 underdog, took the undefeated Frazier off his feet 6 times before the referee stopped the fight, 1 minute and 35 seconds into the second round.
It is over in the second round. George Foreman is the heavyweight champion of the world.
Foreman would defend his heavyweight title twice before losing it in one of the most famous boxing matches in history. More on that next year. On the same day as Foreman's victory, the U.S. Supreme Court reached its landmark decision in the case of Roe v. Wade, deciding that the American Constitution conferred the right to have an abortion. The 7-2 decision argued that a woman's right to an abortion was protected by the privacy rights guaranteed in the 14th Amendment. The court relied upon the 1965 case of Griswold v. Connecticut as precedent, which established the right to privacy with respect to intimate practices. The decision would stand for nearly 50 years until Roe v. Wade was overturned on June 24, 2022 in a 6-3 decision. The Supreme Court in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization overturned Roe v. Wade and returned the issue of abortion rights to individual states on June 24, 2022 in a 6-3 decision. Not to be outdone by Foreman or the Supreme Court, former President Lyndon Baines Johnson also made headlines on January 22nd when he passed away. Johnson initially entered the White House as John F. Kennedy's vice president and was famously sworn in as Commander-in-Chief on board Air Force One after Kennedy's death on November 22, 1963. Despite popular successes with the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act, Johnson received harsh criticism for his inability to achieve victory in the Vietnam War, and many of the changes under his presidency were undone by his successor, Richard Nixon. Speaking of Nixon, at the end of January, Watergate burglars G. Gordon Liddy and James McCord were convicted of conspiracy, burglary, and placing illegal recording devices for their roles in the break-in. 4 other burglars, including Liddy's fellow former CIA agent E. Howard Hunt, had already pled guilty earlier in the month. With convictions and guilty pleas secured, Judge John J. Soraka began threatening the group with severe prison sentences unless they spilled the beans on their co-conspirators, namely President Nixon. Stay tuned to see how this whole Watergate thing shakes out. Just a few hours north of D.C. that same day, makeup-loving band Kiss played their first ever show at the Coventry Club in Queens, New York, for a crowd of less than 10 people. Kiss would go on to enjoy huge success as an arena rock band for much of the decade. They slapped their painted faces on every piece of merchandise imaginable, including comic books, a pinball game, toys, condoms, and even the Kiss casket. Moving into February in the world of music, Iggy and the Stooges released their 3rd studio album, Raw Power. Boasting a thrashing hard rock sound, the chaotic vocals of frontman Iggy Pop, and a mix by none other than the Thin White Duke himself, David Bowie, Raw Power became the group's signature record. Raw Power is considered to be the most important punk rock album ever recorded. Fresh off the signing of the Paris Peace Accords from the previous month, the first American POWs were released by North Vietnam on February 12th. 142 of 591 prisoners were set free in Hanoi and flown back to the U.S. for tearful reunions with their loved ones at Travis Air Force Base in California. The final American POW was released just over a month later, on March 29th. Speaking of notable releases, pop group Tony Orlando and Dawn's hit single, Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree, was released 1 week later on February 19th. The song, told from the point of view of a man returning home from prison and asking his love to tie a yellow ribbon around the oak tree in front of her house if he is still welcome, would hit the top 10 in 10 different countries. The catchy melodramatic jam is notable for being referenced by Nicolas Cage in Con Air.
We'll be right back.
New stick shifters, Honda Pinto Gremlins may look funny, but they're no joke. Stick shifters, get them in gear. Honda Pinto Gremlin, gonna disappear.
In late February, members of the controversial group, the American Indian Movement, began a 71-day occupation of Wounded Knee, South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Around 200 people participated in the occupation in protest of the U.S. government's failure to honor tribal treaties and of Sioux Tribal Chairman Richard Wilson and his alleged corruption after Wilson narrowly avoided impeachment earlier that month. Gunfire was exchanged between protesters and federal officers nearly every day, resulting in 2 deaths and 1 serious injury, before AIM leaders finally negotiated a surrender on May 8th.
The occupation of Wounded Knee ended yesterday. Only 15 of the occupants were arrested. The others were allowed to go free.
Moving into March, Pink Floyd began a 736-week occupation of the Billboard 200 with the release of their landmark album, The Dark Side of the Moon, on March 1st. The concept album was a mega hit, selling over 45 million copies and going platinum 14 times in the UK. And The Dark Side of the Moon's album art has become one of the most recognizable images in music. If you sync up the album to play alongside The Wizard of Oz, well, just do it and see what happens. The next day, 8 members of the Palestinian terrorist group known as Black September took control of the Saudi Arabian embassy in Khartoum, Sudan, taking 10 diplomats hostage, including officials from America, Belgium, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. In exchange for the hostages, the terrorists demanded the release of several captive Palestinians being held in Israeli prisons, as well as the release of Sirhan Sirhan, the man convicted of assassinating Robert Kennedy in 1968. Tragically, the terrorists ended 3 of the hostages after negotiations stalled, before ultimately surrendering to Sudanese authorities 3 days later. Turning to sports? Well, sort of. New York Yankees pitcher Fritz Peterson and Mike Kikich each called bizarre press conferences on the 5th of March to let the world know that they had traded their wives. And not just wives, they had traded their entire families, including their children and even their pets. Thanks for the update, guys. How'd it work out? Better than you might have expected. While Kikich and the former Mrs. Peterson broke up rather quickly, Peterson and the former Mrs. Kikich are still together at the time of this video airing, almost 50 years later. 11 awkward family dinner dates later, Queen Elizabeth XI opened a new London bridge on March 15th. The new bridge was actually the third London Bridge. London Bridge II stood for roughly 600 years. It was sold to an oil tycoon named Robert McCulloch, who had the bridge taken apart and rebuilt in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. A popular rumor suggested that McCulloch purchased the old London Bridge by mistake, thinking he was actually buying the way groovier Tower Bridge. But the tycoon denied this until his dying day, 4 years later. Over in Hollywood, Marlon Brando refused to accept his Best Actor Oscar for his role as Don Vito Corleone in The Godfather on March 27th. Native American actress Maria Louise Cruz, also known as Sacheen Littlefeather, spoke on the actor's behalf, reading a statement written by Brando explaining that he was declining the award in protest of the portrayal of Native Americans in film.
And he has asked me to tell you in a very long speech, which I cannot share with you presently because of time.
Brando was the second actor to refuse an Oscar in as many years. George C. Scott had declined to accept his Best Actor award for his role as Patton in 1971 because he objected to the idea of a ceremony that pitted actors against each other. Good point, George. Heading into April, a notable first. The first mobile phone call was made by Motorola employee Martin Cooper on the 3rd. Cooper made the call on a shoebox-sized prototype that weighed 2.5 pounds. Who did he call? A rival employee at AT&T, who was busy working on his own prototype. Can you hear me now? Because that dunk was deafening. The next day, we head to New York City, where the World Trade Center opened its doors to become the world's tallest building at the time. The Twin Towers took the top spot from the previous record holder. Another famous New York City landmark, the Empire State Building. Although the World Trade Center would only briefly hold the record before losing the title to the Sears Tower the following year, we were really into the tall building race in the 70s. Hollywood still found the time to throw King Kong off the Twin Towers in the 1976 remake. Apparently, that's how they test skyscrapers in New York City. Speaking of high art, the massively influential avant-garde painter Pablo Picasso packed away his mortal easel on April 8th. Picasso was a co-founder of the Cubist movement, an abstract art style found in many of his most famous works, including this 1937 masterpiece. The master and his wife were in the middle of dinner with friends when he collapsed, succumbing to heart failure at the age of 91. 12-year-old Carolyn King took the field as the first girl to play Little League Baseball on May 10th, defying the organization's long-standing rule that disallowed girls from playing. In response, Little League Baseball revoked the Ypsilanti American Little League's charter, effectively banning them from playing. King and the city of Ypsilanti filed a discrimination lawsuit, and though the lawsuit was dismissed, Little League Baseball eventually dropped its boys-only rule in 1975. America's first space station, Skylab, was launched on May 14th. Skylab was 118 feet tall and weighed 77 tons, or the equivalent of about 40 Chevrolet Monte Carlos. Skylab housed its first three-man crew 11 days later, when astronauts boarded the station to make repairs and conduct experiments for the next 28 days. Over the next few years, the station would house 3 separate crews for extended periods of time, collecting vital information about the sun and the effects of living in space on the human body. 2 weeks later, City Councilman Thomas Bradley defeated incumbent Sam Yorty to become the first black mayor of Los Angeles on the 29th of May. A former LAPD officer who retired from the force to practice law, Bradley would go on to be re-elected to an unprecedented 5 terms and made 2 unsuccessful bids to become governor of California. Turning the dial to music, Paul McCartney and Wings released their only good song, Live and Let Die, on June 1st. The song was the theme to the James Bond film of the same name. Although it was far from McCartney's biggest single, Live and Let Die nabbed an Academy Award nomination for Best Song, as well as a Grammy nomination. Not bad for a tune that sounds like it was about his former bandmates. Sticking with music, just 2 weeks later, crooner Marvin Gaye released his mega single, Let's Get It On. An emotional anthem about love and doing the dirty, the song became one of Gaye's signature hits. It remains one of Motown Records' most successful recordings of all time, selling 2 million copies in its first 6 weeks of release alone.
We'll be right back.
If you love almonds,
Almonds? Yeah.
really love almonds,
I do.
I do.
I do.
You'll love the Mars Almond Bar. You get an almond in every bite.
Heading into July, millionaire heir John Paul Getty III was kidnapped in Rome. Getty's grandfather, the infamously frugal oil tycoon J. Paul Getty Sr., refused to pay his teenage grandson's ransom of $17 million. He eventually agreed to a discounted ransom of $3.2 million, but only after the kidnappers mailed their hostage's severed ear to a Roman newspaper. But the ordeal didn't end there. We'll find out more later this year. On July 20th, legendary actor and martial artist Bruce Lee passed away at the age of 32. Lee had been in Hong Kong to discuss his upcoming film, Game of Death. The actor had previously been diagnosed with cerebral edema 2 months earlier, after collapsing in Golden Harvest Studios while recording some dialogue for Enter the Dragon. The cause of Lee's death has been the subject of intense speculation, blaming everything from a gangland assassination to an evil curse. The curse theory would gain more momentum 30 years later, when Lee's son Brandon was fatally shot in a freak accident while filming the action movie The Crow. Moving into August, musician Stevie Wonder fell into a coma after suffering a head injury in a serious car accident on the 6th of August. The singer was being driven to a radio station by his cousin to promote his latest album, when their car crashed into the back of a flatbed truck. Wonder remained in a coma for 4 days. He even temporarily lost his sense of smell, which, come on, universe, don't do that to Stevie.
Hey, you're supposed to be the fastest thing in the valley, man, but that can't be your car. It must be your mama's car. I'm sort of embarrassed to be this close to you. Yeah, well, I'm not surprised.
September would start out with some sad news, as Lord of the Rings author J.R.R. Tolkien set sail for the Undying Lands at age 81. The Lord of the Rings has sold more than 50 million copies to date, and has been translated into roughly 30 different languages, including the Black Speech of Mordor, probably.
Bridge, this is the captain. What's happened?
2 Romulan battle cruisers, Captain, and they're heading right for us.
Elsewhere, Wonder Woman's transparent plane carries the Super Friends seaward.
I wish I could join you in Aquaman.
Thanks, Batman, but this operation is best handled by 2.
Sticking with sports, decorated tennis pro Billie Jean King defeated former champ Bobby Riggs in a much ballyhooed exhibition match dubbed the Battle of the Sexes on September 20th. The 55-year-old gambler and hustler Riggs began challenging female players earlier in the year, goading his potential opponents with rants like, "Women belong in the bedroom and kitchen," in that order. Riggs was no match for the 30-year-old #1 ranked female player, King, who walloped him 3 games in a row to win the match in front of 30,000 fans at the Houston Astrodome, and an estimated 90 million more on television. The 5th of October saw the release of eccentric ivory-tickling rock star Elton John's 7th album. Goodbye, Yellow Brick Road. Goodbye contained a number of hit singles, including Candle in the Wind, Benny and the Jets, Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, and the title track. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road has sold over 30 million copies worldwide. The very next day, Syrian and Egyptian forces launched a coordinated attack on Israel, with the aim of reclaiming territory lost during the Third Arab-Israeli War in 1967. Dubbed the Yom Kippur War, the attack was specifically intended to take Israeli forces by surprise, as it occurred on the holiest day of the year in the Jewish faith. Although the armed conflict only lasted a few weeks, with a ceasefire going into effect on the 25th of October, the fallout was further-reaching, particularly for Israel and its allies. Elvis and Priscilla Presley divorced after 6 years of marriage on October 9th. The two had begun seeing each other when Priscilla was 14 and Elvis was 24. Jailhouse Rock indeed. Although the king frequently slept with other women, and Priscilla had begun an affair with her karate instructor that nearly resulted in Elvis hiring a hitman to take the guy out, the split was amicable, and the two remained close for the rest of Elvis's life. Sticking with the world of music, country music legend Dolly Parton released her fan-favorite single, Jolene, on the 15th of October, scoring her second #1 hit as a solo artist. The song is Parton's most recorded tune, with everyone from Olivia Newton-John to the White Stripes doing their own covers. Parton later claimed in an interview that she wrote the lyrics to Jolene on the same day she penned the words to another song that would become a massively popular cover, I Will Always Love You.
We'll be right back.
Magnavox presents Odyssey, the electronic game of the future. Odyssey easily attaches to any brand TV, black and white or color, to create a closed-circuit electronic playground.
The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC if you're nasty, enacted an oil embargo on the 17th of October. The embargo punished the United States and several other countries for their decision to assist Israel by reducing its exports by 5% per month until Israel withdrew its forces from the contested territories. By December, oil exports had been reduced by over 75%, leading to one of the worst energy crises in modern history. Gas rationing in the U.S. saw high prices and long lines that sometimes stretched for miles. President Nixon asked filling stations to refrain from selling gasoline on Saturday nights or Sundays. In some cases, cars would be restricted to buying gas on odd or even numbered days, depending on which type of number was the last digit of their license plate. And in the UK, people were encouraged to only heat a single room of their homes during the winter. On the topic of Nixon, Tricky Dick ousted Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox and accepted the resignations of Attorney General Elliot Richardson and Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus on October 20th. The culling became unofficially known as the Saturday Night Massacre, as Nixon cleaned house at the Justice Department in a desperate attempt to conceal his involvement in the Watergate scandal. But it didn't quite pan out for the embattled commander-in-chief. The public was outraged by Nixon's behavior, and 21 members of Congress began calling for his impeachment.
Hey, Fish! Who loves you, baby? You're beautiful.
Moving into November, beloved comedian David Stringbean Aikman and his wife Estelle were gunned down by burglars in their Nashville, Tennessee home on the 10th. Aikman was a popular fixture at Nashville's Grand Ole Opry, as well as a main cast member on Hee Haw. The murderers, cousins Marvin and John Brown, had heard Aikman kept large amounts of cash on hand, so they broke into his cabin and waited for him to return home, ambushing him and Estelle as they walked through the door. The Browns each received 2 life sentences, and while Marvin died in prison, John Brown would eventually be paroled after serving 41 years in 2014. Nixon delivered his infamous quotes to a crowd of journalists at Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida on November 17th, saying the infamous,
"People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got."
Your attention, please. We will soon be landing at Westworld, the ultimate resort. Each resort is maintained by reliable computer technology.
Abducted Getty heir John Paul Getty III was finally freed by his captors on December 15th. The kidnappers dropped Paul off on the side of a stretch of road in the middle of a downpour. Getty never fully recovered from the incident. He developed a serious drug addiction that resulted in a tragic overdose in 1981, which left him paralyzed and unable to speak. He passed away at age 54 in 2011.
Must have left my wallet in my room.
Don't hand me into that crap.
You better have the money, or it's going to be all around Chicago that you're welched. You won't be able to get a game of jacks.
And that's how 1973 came to a close, with a sting and a hiss of pea soup. 1974 was grooving up over the horizon, bringing with it the end of the Watergate scandal, the crowning of a new home run king, and the abduction of another wealthy teenager that would go in a shockingly different direction. But that's all for next year. Coming soon, 1974. 1974 was the year everything changed.
Personally, figured I was watching something that somebody else would never see again in the world.
Americans learned the president wasn't untouchable, or even that trustworthy, causing a ripple effect of disillusionment. But the year also saw a microbus full of classic shows, movies, and music make their mark on pop culture history.
Shazam!
And 2 sports heroes made the most dramatic statements of their careers. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports, and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. Get ready for an abrupt turnover at the White House like you've never seen before, because today, we're talking 1974. Now strap into your rocket cycle and get ready to jump all the president's men. This is 1974. The year would start off as an important moment for nerddom, as the fantasy role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons made its debut in January. Initially developed by Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax, and published by the group's homegrown company, Tactical Studies Rules, D&D borrowed heavily from miniature wargaming and Tolkien's Lord of the Rings to become the first tabletop RPG. While it initially frightened mothers around the world, resulting in a brief satanic panic, and a pretty quaint movie starring a young Tom Hanks,
I have spells. I'm going to fly.
D&D has hung around like a lich in a tomb for over 40 years, giving creative nerds around the world a groovy new social outlet. Decidedly ungroovy, President Richard Nixon signed the Emergency Highway Energy Conservation Act on the second day of the year, creating a national speed limit of 55 miles per hour. The act was a response to the OPEC oil embargo enacted the previous year, which threw the U.S. into one of the worst energy crises of the 20th century. The new, lower speed limit was meant to force American drivers to be more fuel efficient. And it stayed on the books until November 28, 1995, nearly 20 years later.
Most people do travel over 55. Most people that travel interstate go 60, 65, or 70 anyway.
Apparently, lobbyist Sammy Hagar's work finally paid off. Speaking of music, The Joker by Steve Miller Band hit the top of the Billboard Hot 100 on January 12th. The meta stoner anthem, peppered with references to the band's earlier songs and a Hall of Fame nonsense word, has sold over 5 million copies in the U.S. We still don't know what the hell a pompatus is, but we dig it.
Can I talk to you for a minute, Fonz, outside?
Yeah, we'll talk right here.
Well, it's kind of personal.
Oh, personal, yeah. Hey, Vivian, go out and find me a fallen star, will you? Be back in 5 minutes.
I don't have a watch.
Hey, count one, Mississippi. She's got great lips.
What's the worth of a man? For Steve Austin, it's $6 million. Steve Austin is the $6 million man, and he's worth every penny.
In late January, McDonald's CEO Ray Kroc threw down a few stacks of his McMillions to buy MLB's San Diego Padres. Kroc, who had retired from running the Golden Arches the previous year, made quite the steal purchasing the Pods for a cool $12 million, preventing a move that would have relocated the Padres to Washington, D.C. Heading into the 1st of February, 21-year-old University of Washington student Linda Ann Healy vanished from her apartment in the early morning hours of February 1st. Healy's remains were discovered by forestry students on Taylor Mountain in Sonoma County, California, a year later. Although nobody knew it yet, Healy was the first documented victim of Ted Bundy. Bundy was not done wreaking havoc. More on him to come later in the 70s. The next day, pop icon Barbra Streisand scored her first #1 hit with The Way We Were, which hit the top spot on the Billboard Hot 100. The first EGOT winner, that's Emmys, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony, was already an established singer and actress. In fact, The Way We Were was the theme song of the 1973 film of the same name, which starred Streisand and earned her a second Oscar nomination for Best Actress. The 70s were good to Babs. 2 days later, 19-year-old heiress Patty Hearst was abducted from her apartment by the Symbionese Liberation Army on February 4th. The leftist terrorist organization dragged Hearst, who was millionaire publisher William Randolph Hearst's granddaughter, into the car in a hail of gunfire and demanded that the Hearst family distribute millions of dollars of food to needy people across California.
Mr. Hearst wants to save his daughter. Each Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday for 4 successive weeks, each person with one of the listed cards can go to publicized stores and pick up their food.
The family attempted to comply, but the kidnappers didn't release Patty. Something much more unexpected happened. 2 months after her abduction, a surveillance camera caught Hearst helping the SLA rob a bank in San Francisco. She then released a statement declaring that she had willingly joined the organization.
I've been given the choice of 1, being released in a safe area, or 2, joining the forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army. I have chosen to stay and fight.
This cliffhanger plot twist will finish playing out next year.
We'll be right back.
You are about to witness the most amazing man-made jewelry ever created. The original multicolor mood ring. This is the ring that senses your deepest feelings. Scientifically developed, the incredible chroma stone senses thermal changes deep within your body, reflects all your mood changes in a fascinating kaleidoscope of color. Discover the mysterious powers of the multicolor mood ring in elegant gold or silver tone settings. Dare to wear the original multicolor mood ring with the fascinating chroma stone. Only $5 while supplies last.
Boy, is he strict.
Gotta get in there close and find out what's happening.
There's our ticket.
Hey, boys,
Look what I got here. Hey, where are the white women at?
To be a TV star, you got to be a real natural. My husband James used to have slow blood. Thanks to Vita Bright Health Tonic, my blood is fast, fast, fast. Vito Bright is dynamite.
Jaws made a bodacious splash in the world of shark fiction on the 10th. The best-selling thriller, written by first-time novelist Peter Benchley, caused a feeding frenzy among Hollywood executives. The film rights to the story were sold before it even hit bookstores. Producers at Universal Studios hired an up-and-coming filmmaker named Steven Spielberg to direct the movie version. We'll see if that film did anything next year. Speaking of buzz, Army Private Robert K. Preston buzzed the White House in a stolen helicopter on February 17th. The 20-year-old soldier led police helicopters on a chase through the National Mall before the Secret Service opened fire on him, forcing him to land on the White House's South Lawn with minor injuries.
His intentions was to fly the aircraft directly into the White House.
Preston later claimed that he had joined the Army hoping to become a helicopter pilot and was upset that he'd been made a mechanic instead. Well, that's one way to show him what you got. Preston ultimately served 2 months in prison and was dishonorably discharged. Bummer. Speaking of broken dreams, Cher split from Sonny Bono on the 20th, ending the musical power couple after more than a decade in the spotlight. As a duo, Sonny and Cher released their #1 hit, I Got You, Babe, and hosted a popular variety show featuring their playful bickering.
Folks, I could have sang in any one of those musicals, really, because
Yeah, I know one you would have been great for. The Wizard of Oz.
Apparently, that bickering wasn't all that playful. The two were already living in separate homes by the show's 3rd season, and were officially divorced 1 year later. Jumping ahead to late March, a group of Chinese farmers digging a well just outside of Xi'an discovered an underground chamber containing 6,000 life-sized terracotta warriors on the 29th. The famous terracotta army was revealed to be guarding the tomb of the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, who ruled back in 221 BCE. The site turned out to be a sprawling 20-mile complex containing a palace, a burial pyramid, offices, and 2 other pits containing even more terracotta warriors. Far out. Heading into April, Swedish pop group ABBA won the Eurovision Song Contest on the 6th with their song Waterloo. It was the first Eurovision victory in Sweden's history, and it turned out to be the breakthrough moment the band was looking for. Waterloo became an international hit and made ABBA superstars, and the group remains one of the most popular and best-selling acts of all time. Speaking of all-time moments, we turn to sports as Hammerin' Hank Aaron broke Babe Ruth's career home run record 2 days later.
What a marvelous moment for the country and the world. A black man is getting a standing ovation in the Deep South for breaking a record of an all-time baseball idol.
In the 4th inning against the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Braves' star right fielder spanked his 715th dinger at Atlanta's Fulton County Stadium. Aaron finished his baseball career with a staggering 755 homers, a record that stood for just over 31 years until San Francisco Giants slugger Barry Bonds broke it in August of 2007. But, you know, juicing. 3 months after abducting Patty Hearst, the Symbionese Liberation Army engaged the LAPD in one of the largest police shootouts in history on May 17th. 500 Los Angeles officers raided an SLA safe house in Compton, resulting in an explosive exchange during which more than 9,000 rounds were fired. Police accidentally set fire to the house during the gunfight, which burned to the ground as all 6 SLA members inside perished. Near the end of May, legendary jazz pianist and composer Duke Ellington passed away. Ellington, who had just turned 75 the previous month, is one of the biggest figures in jazz music history. He popularized big band jazz music as a regular fixture at Harlem's Cotton Club, and as a sought-after band leader and a songwriter for over 50 years. Heading into June, arguably the most ill-conceived promotion in sports history went down on the 4th, otherwise known as 10-cent beer night. The Cleveland Indians lured fans to a game against the Houston Astros by offering as much beer as they could drink for just a dime a pop. Fans became so drunk and unruly that an actual riot broke out in the 9th inning, with people rushing out onto the field to attack the players with makeshift weapons.
Pretty poor timing for a beer night to start with. After the incident in Dallas, where the two teams fought, led to a very unpleasant situation.
The Indians were forced to forfeit the game, and a firm 4-drink limit was placed on the remaining 10-cent beer nights Cleveland had already scheduled. In mid-June, Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein published their explosive nonfiction bestseller, All the President's Men. The book was a detailed collection of the duo's ongoing investigation of the Watergate scandal, including Woodward's meetings with the mysterious Deep Throat, an inside source who provided the journalists with vital information. Deep Throat was later revealed to be FBI Associate Director Mark Felt, although Woodward and Bernstein kept his identity a secret until Felt revealed it himself in 2005 at the age of 91.
We'll be right back.
By reaching out to see things differently, man's genius is now helping to free him from his earthly home. The amazing electronic devices like this one, designed for Quasar Color TV. It's part of our continuing improvement in 100% solid-state design, where solid-state devices contribute to your confidence in the set you buy.
Reach out for Quasar!
The first Universal Product Code, or UPC code, was scanned on June 26th in Troy, Ohio, to sell a pack of Wrigley's chewing gum. The now ubiquitous codes were designed by 2 Drexel University graduate students to create a streamlined system for grocery stores to price and track their inventory, because people used to have to do all that by hand. Speaking of bold ideas, General Augusto Pinochet declared himself Supreme Chief Chile the next day, after seizing power from President Salvador Allende in a military coup the previous year. Initially, Pinochet was meant to share power with other members of the junta, but he quickly decided that it was best for everyone if he ran the whole thing. Pinochet remained dictator of Chile until he was actually voted out of power, and democracy was restored on March 11, 1990. Pinochet stuck around as the commander-in-chief of Chile's armed forces until 1998, when he was finally arrested for crimes against humanity. But a wall of international red tape and his failing health kept him out of prison until he passed away in 2006, before he could stand trial. 3 weeks later, former Beatle John Lennon was ordered to vacate the United States in 60 days on the 18th of Hey July. Yeah, we know he didn't write that song, but he should have. Come on, it's about his son. The deportation stemmed from a 1968 marijuana charge the songwriter had received in the UK. Lennon's strong anti-war stance, coupled with his popularity among young Americans, made him a target of the Nixon administration, who believed he posed a serious threat to Nixon's re-election. But the walrus wouldn't have to sweat Tricky Dick much longer. More on that after a quick word from Charles Bronson and the Professor.
This is the story of a man who decided to clean up the most violent town in the world. Never make a death wish, because a death wish always comes true.
In a story forced upon us by our producer, Neil Peart officially joined the band Rush in late July. Peart hopped on the Canadian power rock trio after original drummer left the band due to a lifelong illness. The Professor would stay with the band for over 40 years. Not a bad run. Moving into August, Richard Milhouse Nixon made history on the 8th, when he announced to the American people his intention to resign from the office of the presidency the next day.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Nixon had finally turned over his tapes of recorded conversations in the Oval Office to the Justice Department 3 days earlier, the content of which undeniably incriminated him as a co-conspirator in the Watergate break-in and subsequent cover-up. Spiro Agnew, Nixon's vice president, had resigned a year earlier in disgrace while pleading no contest to an unrelated charge of tax evasion. Gerald Ford was sworn in moments after Nixon's resignation and gave the former president a blanket pardon for any crimes committed while in office. 8 days later, punk godfathers The Ramones made their concert debut at New York City's CBGB on the 16th. Often credited with being the first punk rock band, the group churned out classics like Blitzkrieg Bop and I Wanna Be Sedated over a 2-decade career of non-stop touring and recording. They're considered one of the most influential artists of the past 50 years, which is pretty groovy for a band that never had much commercial success. Hero pilot Charles Lindbergh took his final flight on August 26th, passing into the clouds at age 72. Lucky Lindy made history in his small monoplane, the Spirit of St. Louis. when he became the first person to complete a solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean on May 21, 1927. He made history a second time under much more tragic circumstances, when his young son was abducted from his home on March 1, 1932, and found dead several months later. The kidnapping and subsequent slaying of Charles Jr. became known as the crime of the century. Staying with aviation news as we move into September, the SR-71 Blackbird flew from New York City to London in under 2 hours on the 1st of September, setting the speed record for transatlantic travel that stands to this day. The Lockheed jet, piloted by Air Force Majors James Sullivan and Noel Whitfield, completed its journey in 1 hour and 45 minutes, touching down in London in less time than it takes to watch a Grateful Dead concert.
Wow, where does it go? Come on, let's go down and see.
The time doorway cannot be used for anything until this paradox is resolved.
But that means we'll be killed!
You have a fine grasp of the obvious.
Legendary daredevil and every 70s boy hero, Evel Knievel, attempted to jump a rocket-powered motorcycle over Idaho's Snake River Canyon on September 8th. The stunt was actually a compromise. Knievel had originally intended to jump the Grand Canyon, but the man told him absolutely not. Suits, they always harsh everyone's groove. Unfortunately, a parachute deployed too early, cutting the jump short in less than spectacular fashion.
When I punched that fire button and that thing hit, all I saw was blue sky, but then I lost all perspective. I may have blacked out, I don't know.
Luckily, and for once, Knievel walked away with relatively minor injury.
It's all right. Everything's all right.
What?
There were 2 raccoons. The one that killed the chickens. It's Jasper out there now. He sat up and begged. It was the prettiest sight I ever saw.
Why don't you guys go back to Disneyland and leave me alone, huh? Well, I hope nobody forgot the peanut butter sandwiches.
If Agent Slater lays a hand on me, I'm gonna close it up like a cherry stone. You're gonna be talking to my lawyer.
Who's doing your material? It's really monotonous.
The month of October would begin with a landmark horror film.
What happened was true, just as terrifying as being there. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. After you stop screaming, you'll start talking about it.
TV lost one of its most influential figures on October 13th, when popular variety show host Ed Sullivan passed away at age 73. Sullivan's eponymous weekly program, The Ed Sullivan Show, had ended just 3 years earlier in 1971. That's one way to enjoy retirement.
We'll be right back.
You can go to Sambo's day or night. The food is good, the price is right. You can eat dinner anytime.
And you can dine for $1.99 at Sambo's. Now, till May 11th, our dinner special is Sambo's all-beef chopped steak, chili and beans, soup or salad, dinner bread, beverage, and dessert.
Something good is always cooking at Sambo's.
The United States Air Force got into the Halloween spirit by launching one of the most frightening weapons in history on October 25th. An ICBM, or Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, was successfully dropped from a plane for the first time as part of America's strategy to develop more mobile methods of delivering nuclear payloads. Previously, ICBMs had to be launched from stationary underground silos or from nuclear submarines. The test did not help escalating Cold War tensions. 5 days later, Muhammad Ali defeated George Foreman during the legendary Rumble in the Jungle bout in Kinshasa, Zaire, to become the world heavyweight champion for a second time. Ali let Foreman wear himself out using his famous rope-a-dope technique for the first 7 rounds before striking with a flurry of his own to KO the reigning champ in the final seconds of round 8. The Rumble in the Jungle remains one of the most celebrated fights in boxing history. We next go to space, where the first message from Earth was transmitted into the stars on November 16th. Known as the Arecibo message, because it was sent from the Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico, the transmission contained formulas and equations describing DNA, as well as some figures about the planet's population and a return address, should any aliens ever want to come visit. The message was meant more as a demonstration of human ingenuity and technology rather than an earnest attempt to contact aliens, even though Carl Sagan did help create it. 5 days later, Congress overrode Gerald Ford's presidential veto to expand the Freedom of Information Act and strengthen the Privacy Act of 1974. Both measures were a direct response to the Watergate scandal, designed to make the government more transparent and accountable, and to limit the government's ability to surveil its own people. According to documents declassified in 2004, Ford was encouraged to try to slap the bill down by Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. Speaking of old people, the most complete skeleton of an early human ancestor yet discovered was found in Ethiopia 3 days later. The fossilized skeleton of Australopithecus afarensis was uncovered by a team of scientists led by American paleoanthropologist Donald Johanson and French geologist Maurice Taïeb, and was nicknamed Lucy after the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. December saw the end of one beloved TV show and the continuation of 2 major franchises.
I don't know. Mr. Wentworth just told me to come in here and say that there was trouble at the mill, that's all. I didn't expect a kind of Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
What's going on? What the hell you doing now, boy? You're not thinking.
I sure am, boy. Never heard of Evel Knievel?
There's a plane waiting for us to take us to Miami in an hour. We'll make a big thing about it. I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart. You broke my heart.
Little-known guitarist Lindsey Buckingham and singer Stevie Nicks closed out the year by joining the rock group Fleetwood Mac on December 31st. The duo had recorded an album the previous year under the name Buckingham Nicks. Although Fleetwood Mac had previously enjoyed some success, the addition of Buckingham and Nicks would jettison them to global superstardom. But we'll hear more about that in a future episode. And so, 1974 came to a close, with the future looking bright for America, a rock group, and an Oscar-winning film series. 1975 was stretching its bell-bottomed legs just over the horizon, ready to boogie into view with a really big fish, the fall of Saigon, and the founding of a small computer company called Microsoft. But that is all for next year. Coming soon, 1975. 1975. This is where the plot thickens. While the previous 2 years had seen the end of a war and given a crooked commander-in-chief the boot, the midpoint of the 1970s presented an uncertain future. A few governments changed hands, the US and the UK experienced historic tragedies, and some people really had it in for Gerald Ford. But 1975 had some pretty thrilling high points. 2 iconic gladiators faced off for the final time. America's favorite stuntman bounced back from a brush with death to accomplish the impossible. And the summer blockbuster was created by a rubber shark and 2 notes on a piano. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports, and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. Get ready to take the Pepsi challenge, because this episode is all about 1975. Now, you're gonna need a bigger boat for this one. This is 1975. The year kicked off with a crowd of over 2,000 Led Zeppelin fans getting the let out at Boston Gardens, where a riot broke out in the early morning hours of January 6th. The throng of Leadheads had gathered the night before to try to score some tickets to an upcoming Zeppelin concert the moment they went on sale. But the crowd became agitated and broke into the arena around midnight and trashed the place. The mob was calmed when the decision was made to open the box office and begin slinging Zeppelin tickets. But by then, the damage had been done. $50,000 worth to be exact. That's enough to buy several stairways to heaven.
Let's take a look at our Wheel of Fortune. Top dollar value on the wheel for first round's $500. Look out for this black space bankrupt, because if you hit it, you lose all your cash, but not your merchandise, because once you buy a prize, it's yours to keep forever.
Yeah, they must be real rich.
Hold it, Diane. We are the Jeffersons.
Are you right, Louis? He's a great joker.
Hey, Bart, I think he's stoned.
Stoned? What are you talking about? Hey, what do you say we guys go down to the beach and shoot some clams?
Comedy legend Larry Fine, better known as Larry of the Three Stooges, departed for the slapstick stage in the sky on the 24th. Fine wouldn't be the only stooge we'd lose in 75. More on that later in the year. A Hungarian-born college professor named Erno Rubik applied for a patent for his Magic Cube on January 30th. Originally designed as an exercise for his interior design students, Rubik's three-dimensional puzzle would become one of the most popular brain teasers in pop culture history, the Rubik's Cube. Hey, 80s! March saw some major geopolitical shakeups. The military government of Ethiopia abolished its monarchy on the 21st, beginning a 17-year period of Marxist rule. The Derg, the junta that had seized control of Ethiopia in a coup the previous September, was an ally of the Soviet Union and would lead the East African country into an extreme famine in the 1980s, brought on by historic droughts and war with Somalia. 4 days later, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia was abolished from the planet by his nephew, Prince Faisal bin Musaid, whose motives remain unknown to this day. The king was fatally shot during a royal audience with the prince, who had just returned from a visit to the United States. And although he was initially declared insane, the prince was convicted of regicide and publicly executed 3 months later.
He's a pinball wizard, there has to be a twist. A pinball wizard got such a wrist.
Once in a lifetime, there comes a motion picture which changes the whole history of motion pictures.
Amusement park caricature sprung to life, Bill Gates made the first steps toward becoming a gazillionaire when he founded Microsoft with Paul Allen on April 4th in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Oddly, Albuquerque might have ceased to exist were it not for the spell check feature in Microsoft Office. At the time, Gates, a student at Harvard University, and Allen, a computer programmer from Boston, intended to produce software for the Altair 8800 personal computer, but the company grew way beyond those modest goals. Flash forward 12 years later to 1987, when the 31-year-old Gates became the world's youngest billionaire after Microsoft went public in 1985. If they could only make an internet browser that works. Back to 75, where on April 8th, Frank Robinson took the field as Major League Baseball's first black manager during a game against the New York Yankees. Robinson also played in that game, hitting a home run on his first at-bat in Cleveland's 5-3 victory. Pretty groovy day for Robinson.
We'll be right back.
Now you can play the Evel Knievel stunt game right at home. There are 6 exciting Evel Knievel stunts, like stop Evel's cycle before it hits the barrels. Make Evel stop on the ramp. Not that time.
Sticking with baseball, the San Diego Chicken made his first appearance at a Padres game the next day. The Chicken, portrayed by Ted Yanolas, was initially conceived as a mascot for the local radio station, but Yanolas began attending Padres games in the costume and turned the character into a sports icon. Although he slowed down some in recent years, the San Diego Chicken still makes public appearances to this day. Ironically, the Chicken made his debut the same day former McDonald's CEO and then Padres owner Ray Kroc infamously took control of the broadcasting booth in the middle of the game and began ranting to fans about his team's poor performance. Just over a week later, the alliterative dictator Pol Pot took control of Cambodia when his Khmer Rouge guerrilla army seized the capital city of Phnom Penh, bringing an end to the Cambodian Civil War on April 17th. Pol Pot instituted one of the most notoriously cruel regimes in modern history, outlawing virtually all forms of expression, taking children from their families and conscripting them into military service, and sentencing any citizens he deemed undesirable to work camps and prisons where they were fatally starved and tortured. Pol Pot would remain in power until he was deposed and imprisoned by his own followers on June 12, 1997. Pol Pot spent the rest of his life under house arrest and succumbed to heart failure a year later. The West German embassy in Stockholm, Sweden was bombed by the left-wing Red Army faction on the 25th of April. The guerrillas seized control of the embassy to demand the release of some 24 anarchist prisoners, but the situation quickly escalated, resulting in the demise of 2 hostages and one of the captors. One of the more unforgettable images of the 20th century was captured 4 days later during the fall of Saigon.
The city of Saigon was renamed today. The victorious communists who forced the city's surrender said the capital of South Vietnam henceforth will be known as Ho Chi Minh City.
The United States officially ended its occupation of South Vietnam on April 29th, closing the U.S. Embassy for the final time and evacuating all remaining American personnel via helicopter. But South Vietnamese citizens, desperate to escape before the North Vietnamese army took control, began flooding the compound to try and board the helicopters. Ultimately, a total of 81 helicopters evacuated 1,373 Americans and 5,595 Vietnamese over the course of 19 hours. An additional 65,000 South Vietnamese citizens fled the city in boats, barges, rafts, and sampans to reach the U.S. warships floating just off the coast. Moving into the summer, Mo Howard, the last living member of the Three Stooges and the comedy trio's de facto leader, yucked his last yuck on May the 4th. Oh, and on Star Wars Day, too. Bummer. At least it wasn't a thing at that point. Or, no, really. It's not an actual event, you guys. It's a self-generated marketing event. 6 days later, Sony unveiled its new Betamax recorder in Japan. Beta was the first home video format, allowing consumers to record broadcasts or watch pre-packaged movies in their own living rooms. It hit the stores in the United States that November, but the excitement over Betamax would be short-lived, as it was quickly overshadowed by the debut of the VHS format the following year. The next day, R&B singer Natalie Cole released her debut album, Inseparable. Cole already had bona fides as a crooner. She was the daughter of legendary vocalist Nat King Cole. But the release of Inseparable made her a star in her own right, selling over 1 million copies and earning her 2 Grammy Awards. Speaking of hits, Glenn Campbell released his hit single, Rhinestone Cowboy, 2 weeks later on May 26th. Rhinestone hit the top spot on both the Billboard Hot 100 and Hot Country Songs chart, the first country song to do so since Jimmy Dean's 1961 hit, Big Bad John. I'm a rhinestone cowboy. And now it's stuck in your head. You're welcome. That same day, Evel Knievel, the most famous daredevil to have ever lived, had a brush with death when he got into a frightening crash while performing a stunt in London's Wembley Stadium. Knievel was attempting to jump 13 buses on his motorcycle when he wiped out, breaking his hand and fracturing 2 vertebrae and his pelvis. Pelvis? Yeah, you can break that. The crash left him so shaken that he told the audience he would never attempt another jump.
That you are the last people in the world who will ever see me jump, because I will never, ever, ever jump again. I'm through.
But he changed his mind pretty quickly. More on that later in the year. 1 day later, the UK suffered its worst motor vehicle disaster in history when a bus loaded with passengers fell off the Dibbles Bridge. The bus landed upside down and was nearly flattened by the plunge, which fatally injured 33 people on board. Another motor vehicle tragedy struck 3 days later when American Olympic long-distance runner Steve Prefontaine drove his car off the road near his house in Eugene, Oregon, in the early morning hours of May 30th. Prefontaine was just 24 years old at the time of his fatal accident and had been training to compete in the 1976 Olympics.
We'll be right back.
Ask any mermaid you happen to see, what's the best tuna chicken of the sea?
June kicked off with a more peaceful development when Egyptian President Anwar Sadat reopened the Suez Canal on the 5th of the month. The canal, an important shipping lane between the Persian Gulf and Europe, had been closed 8 years earlier in 1967 during the Six-Day War in response to Israel's occupation of the Sinai Peninsula. Today, roughly 300 million tons of goods travel through the Suez Canal each year. That is a lot of 8 tracks.
Anyway.
Hey. I'm gonna get you some lemonade. Oh, you're fine, darling. Fine. It's the microphone. Give me the mic.
I ain't done.
Oh, I know.
I ain't done.
Go get some glass of water. Come on, boys, help her off, all right? You'll come back, okay, darling?
Thank you.
Notorious mob boss Sam Giancana was whacked in his home on June 19th. The hit took place the night before Giancana was set to testify before Congress about the mafia's involvement with the CIA in plans to assassinate Fidel Castro. To this day, Giancana's murder remains unsolved.
I don't want no volunteers. I don't want no mates. There's too many captains on this island. $10,000 for me by myself. For that, you get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
Theatrical shock rock singer Alice Cooper took a tumble off the stage during a concert in Vancouver on the 23rd of June. Cooper, known for his elaborate performances, tripped over a prop during the first song of the night and crashed headfirst through the security barriers on the floor below, breaking 6 of his ribs and nabbing a pretty gnarly concussion. After being told the extent of his injuries, the singer went back out and performed a few more songs, presumably far, far away from the edge of the stage. A much more tragic crash occurred a day later, when Eastern Airlines Flight 66 crashed on approach to New York's JFK Airport on June 24th. The aircraft was thrown off course by strong winds and struck several light towers before impacting on Rockaway Boulevard. 113 of the 124 people on board perished, making it the worst accident in American aviation history at the time. Twilight Zone creator Rod Serling departed for a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind on the 28th of June. Serling's endlessly imitable persona and incisive social commentary made The Twilight Zone a hit, and it remains the benchmark for popular science fiction to this day. That unforgettably trippy theme song doesn't hurt either. Moving into July, tennis icon Arthur Ashe became the first black player to win Wimbledon, the day after Independence Day. The 31-year-old Ashe triumphed over the heavily favored Jimmy Connors, who was both the defending champion and 9 years Ashe's junior. Ashe would retire from competition 5 years later after suffering a heart attack, and became an HIV and AIDS activist after contracting the virus from a blood transfusion following bypass surgery. Ashe passed away in 1993. Famed labor leader Jimmy Hoffa disappeared off the face of the earth on July 20th from the parking lot of a diner in Detroit, Michigan. Hoffa had been the president of the Teamsters Union since 1957 and had become a hugely influential figure in the American labor movement, advocating for workers' rights right up until the day of his disappearance. He also had well-known ties with organized crime, which resulted in him spending several years in prison for bribery. Although Hoffa's fate remains officially unsolved, it hasn't stopped Hollywood from making a bunch of movies about his demise. Italian fashion designer Giorgio Armani founded his eponymous company in Milan, Italy 4 days later with his partner, Sergio Gagliotti. Fashion House has since become synonymous with trend-setting red carpet fashion and is still generating billions of dollars of annual revenue almost 50 years later. Near the end of July, Gerald Ford became the first U.S. president to visit Auschwitz. Ford solemnly paid his respects at the memorial to the 4 million victims of the notorious concentration camp in Poland, while on his way to a multi-nation peace conference in Helsinki, Finland. Led Zeppelin frontman Robert Plant was seriously injured in a car crash in Rhodes, Greece on the 4th of August. The singer had been vacationing with his family while on a short break from touring when he lost control of their rental car and drove off the road. Although his family wasn't seriously injured, Plant suffered a broken elbow and ankle, forcing Led Zeppelin to cancel the rest of their tour and pushing back the release date of their next album by a full year. Well, Zeppelin, good times, bad times, you know they've had their share.
But tonight is the night that my beautiful creature is destined to be born!
Gerald Ford endured the first of 2 attempts on his life when former Charles Manson follower Lynette Squeaky Fromm tried to gun the president down on September 5th. Ford was walking into the state capitol building in Sacramento, California, when Fromm emerged from the crowd, brandishing a pistol, but she had neglected to chamber a round, so whoopsies. Squeaky was squashed to the ground by Secret Service agents as Ford continued inside the building and met with California Governor Jerry Brown as if nothing had happened. Maybe you didn't notice. Nah, you definitely noticed that. The next day, 18-year-old tennis star Martina Navratilova asked for political asylum from communist-controlled Czechoslovakia while competing in the U.S. Open on September 6th. Navratilova had been granted permission to stay in America for the duration of the tournament, but officially defected from her home country the night after she was eliminated from the semifinals. The hot-tempered tennis pro was one of several prominent athletes, artists, entertainers, and others to publicly defect from communist-controlled countries during the Cold War, including gymnast Nadia Comaneci and Detroit Red Wing legend Sergei Fedorov.
Now, the first thing you gotta do is a Vinnie Barbarino look, okay? Your hair, for instance, very casual. It should look like it's being blown by unseen winds.
Just over a week later, Rembrandt's priceless painting, The Night Watch, was badly damaged by a knife-wielding vandal as it hung in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Oh, and we mean priceless, literally. The massive 12 by 14-foot painting has never been assigned a monetary value. The attacker was a former teacher named Wilhelmus de Rijk, who slashed the paintings to ribbons with a bread knife, claiming the Lord had told him to do it. Interestingly, this wasn't the first time that the Night Watch would be randomly attacked by vandals in the 20th century, nor would it be the last. An unemployed shoemaker attempted to deface the painting with a shoemaker's knife in 1911. And we flash forward to April 6, 1990. A man sprayed acid onto the canvas from a pump concealed in his jacket. Luckily, the damage was minimal. Some people really do not like that painting. Coming back to 1975, kidnapping victim turned wanted fugitive Patty Hearst was captured by the FBI in San Francisco on September 18th. Hearst, the granddaughter of publishing magnate William Randolph Hearst, had been abducted by the Symbionese Liberation Army the previous year, who demanded an elaborate ransom for her return. But Hearst appeared to have joined the SLA, releasing a videotaped statement of allegiance and assisting the group in at least 2 armed robberies. Although she later claimed that she had been brainwashed and tormented by her captors, Hearst was convicted for her involvement in the robberies and spent 3 years in prison before her sentence was commuted by President Jimmy Carter in 1979.
Can we help you?
Oh, you speak English?
Of course.
Ah, wonderful! Wunderbar! 17 days after Squeaky Fromm's botched attack, President Ford survived a second attempt on his life when a woman opened fire on him from a crowd gathered outside his hotel in San Francisco. The assailant was a former FBI informant named Sarah Jane Moore, who squeezed off 2 rounds before being subdued by Oliver Sipple, a retired U.S. Marine who happened to be standing near her in the crowd. President Ford escaped unharmed, until his scathing depiction on The Simpsons 2 decades later. Electrifying soul singer Jackie Wilson suffered a massive heart attack in the middle of a performance the following week. Wilson was in the middle of a rendition of his hit song, Lonely Teardrops, at a New Jersey nightclub on September 29th when he suddenly collapsed. The singer lapsed into a 9-year coma, from which he never awakened. Wilson passed away on January 21st, 1984, at the age of 49. Moving into October, and they're checking in on sports, Muhammad Ali narrowly defeated rival Joe Frazier in a legendary boxing match. Dubbed the Thriller in Manila by Ali himself, the champ traded blows with Frazier for a brutal 14 rounds in Quezon City in the Philippines. Frazier's face was so swollen he could barely see, and his corner threw in the towel. It was the third and last time these 2 greats would face each other in the ring, Ali taking 2 of those bouts.
We'll be right back.
No pizza lover is going to buy frozen pizza just because it's convenient. That's why Kellogg made their frozen pizza with thick, rich tomato sauce, fresh peppers and mushrooms, spicy pepperoni, and lots of mozzarella cheese.
A week later, President Ford signed a bill authorizing the admission of women to America's military academies. Previously, the nation's service academies had been male only. The bill generated some controversy, though, as women were barred from combat at the time. In fact, women were still prohibited from most combat roles until January of 2013, when Pentagon Defense Secretary Leon Panetta officially lifted the ban. Women would still be restricted from joining special operations units such as Navy SEALs and the Army Special Forces until 2015.
From Saturday Night News headquarters, this is Weekend Update with Chevy Chase.
You under the covers right now? Did you shower? Good evening. I'm Chevy Chase.
Stuntman Evel Knievel did not stay retired for long. Just 5 months after his crash at Wembley Stadium, the legendary Daredevil jumped 14 Greyhound buses at Ohio's King Island Amusement Park, a distance of over 130 feet. And this time, he stuck the landing. It's just too bad he couldn't ride the Beast after his jump. The greatest wooden coaster wouldn't debut for another 4 years.
From New York, Hollywood, the nation, Washington, and the world. Good morning, America.
Punk band The Sex Pistols played their first show on the 6th at the Common Room of London's St. Martin's School of Art. True to their street punk image, the band neglected to bring any equipment and had to borrow amplifiers from the headlining band Bazooka Joe. The show nearly ended in a fistfight when Pistols' lead singer Johnny Rotten started smashing the loaned gear, which, to be honest, is exactly what you'd expect from a guy named Johnny Rotten. There's a reason he was on Judge Judy in the 90s.
Dr. Bleeker, I always wondered when I'd have the displeasure of meeting you.
She knows who we are.
Oh, I've heard of you. But you should have stuck to sabotaging oil tankers.
Jesus, I mean, you guys do nothing but complain about how you can't stand it in this place here, and then you haven't got the guts just to walk out? I mean, what do you think you are, for Christ's sake, crazy or something? Well, you're not.
Hawaii's Kilauea volcano erupted on November 29th, triggering a massive earthquake that measured a whopping 7.4 on the Richter scale. In addition to the eruption, the earthquake conjured a 47-foot-high tsunami that was felt as far away as Alaska and Japan. The surf was up indeed. Speaking of bombs, an explosive device detonated in a baggage area of LaGuardia Airport 1 day later. The blast tore through the crowded terminal, fatally wounding 11 people and injuring 75 others. Despite being one of the worst terrorist attacks in American history at the time, no group took credit for the bombing, and the incident remains unsolved to this day. And so, 1975 ended on a bittersweet note, with an unforgettable moment of triumph and a shocking and mysterious tragedy. 1976 was just about to roll up to the party, bringing with it a new president, a new gadget, and hey, the Muppets. But that is next year. Coming soon, 1976. 1976 began to lay the groundwork for its upcoming sequel, the 1980s. America celebrated its 200th year, as several prominent figures from the first half of the 20th century faded into the sunset to make room for the next generation of trend-setting icons and world leaders. After the uncertainty of the previous year, 1976 brought with it some welcome promises of hope for the future, including an exciting new space program and the election of a folksy new president, untouched by the stain of Watergate. But it wasn't all floral prints and disco. Unrest and injustice were still rampant around the globe, and the streets of New York City would be darkened by the arrival of one of history's most notorious criminals. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports, and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. You talking to me? You must be talking to me, because this episode is all about 1976. Now don't get too close to that Pinto, because this is 1976. The year kicked off with the moving of a national monument. The Liberty Bell was relocated from Philadelphia's Independence Hall to a newly constructed pavilion a short distance away in Independence National Historic Park on January 1st, in celebration of America's bicentennial. Bit of a sad gift. Nobody wants to reorganize their antiques on their 200th birthday. The Liberty Bell has remained in its new home ever since. Famed mystery writer Agatha Christie passed away on the 12th of January, and the murderer is someone in this room. Just kidding. Christie passed away of natural causes at her home, Winterbrook House, at the age of 85. She is often referred to as the most influential mystery writer to ever put pen to paper, and remains one of the best-selling authors of all time.
And I'm Marie. I understand.
Even the way I did it was difficult.
Sure.
Well, look, man, it's not easy working with a dummy.
The doomed supersonic airliner Concorde took its first commercial flight on January the 21st. 2 flights departed simultaneously from London's Heathrow Airport and France's Orly Airport, bound for Bahrain and Rio de Janeiro, respectively. Although the high-speed plane could carry passengers across the Atlantic in less than half the time, the Concorde never managed to catch on. Only 16 of the planes were sold and were used exclusively to fly from London and Paris to New York until July 20th, 2000, when an Air France Concorde crashed shortly after takeoff, claiming the lives of over 100 passengers and crew.
You could hear the aircraft, you could see the black smoke, and you could see tremendous flames coming out the back.
The Concorde never recovered and took its final commercial flight just over 3 years later on October 24th, 2003.
Well, we gotta get out of here. Well, what do you suggest I do? Flap my arms real hard and head toward the window?
Finishing out the month, future Dana Carvey impersonation George H.W. Bush became the director of the CIA on the 30th.
Anybody dumb enough to accept the job is too dumb to do it.
Bush had previously served 2 terms in the House of Representatives and was a UN ambassador under Richard Nixon. But he wouldn't hang on to the CIA gig for long. Bush resigned from the position exactly 1 year later, following the election of President Jimmy Carter. Geez, George, let us know how you really feel. Moving into February, Nobel Prize-winning physicist Werner Heisenberg passed into the theoretical plane on the 1st. Heisenberg is credited as the father of quantum mechanics, including the famous uncertainty principle, which bears his name. But he was also a man of some dubious distinction. He was instrumental in developing Germany's nuclear program during World War II, as well as inspiring a certain New Mexico chemistry teacher 3 decades later.
Say my name.
You talking to me?
You talking to me? You talking to me?
Rebel without a cause actor Sal Mineo was fatally wounded by a knife-wielding mugger on February 12th. He had been returning home from rehearsals for an upcoming play when he was attacked while parking his car behind his apartment. Mineo succumbed to his wounds, passing away at the age of 37. A pizza delivery driver named Lionel Ray Williams was convicted of the crime and sentenced to life in prison, but was paroled in 1990 after serving just 12 years. The next day, American figure skating champ Dorothy Hamill took home the gold medal for ladies singles at the 1976 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, Austria. Hamill's medal-winning performance included her signature move, a camel spin into a sit spin dubbed the Hamill Camel.
And a final scratch spin. A performance without any flaws.
We'll be right back.
Dorothy Hamill for Clairol, short and sassy.
The longest, it was about just to the top of my shoulders. Straight bangs. And I used to pull it back like this. Now with short hair, I need more body. So I use Clairol Short and Sassy, the conditioner for short hair. Even after blow drying, Short and Sassy makes it shiny and gives it body. And let's face it, without body, short hair is just short hair.
Clairol, short and sassy, with twice the protein of the leading conditioner.
For the short and sassy look.
Hurtling into March, the largest observed meteorite in history fell to Earth near Jilin City in China during a massive meteor shower on the 8th. The record-setting chunk of space rock weighed nearly 4,000 pounds, or roughly the same as 1.8 million Dennis Eckersley rookie cards. To date, it remains the biggest observed meteor to strike the planet. Heavy, man. The Who's hard-partying drummer Keith Moon collapsed in the middle of a show at the Boston Gardens on March 9th. The English rock band had just started their set when Moon simply toppled over behind his drum kit. At the time, singer Roger Daltrey chalked the incident up to a bad case of the flu, but it was later revealed that Moon had suffered a near-fatal overdose of booze and prescription pills. Moon bounced back in time to play a makeup show a month later, but his luck would run out before the end of the decade. More on that in 2 years. 2 weeks later, Argentine President Isabel Perón was overthrown in a military coup on the 24th.
El país transita por una de las etapas más difíciles de su historia.
Perón, the third wife of former President Juan Perón, took office after her husband's death in 1974, during a period of extreme socio-political unrest. Jorge Rafael Videla, the general who led the military junta against Perón, controlled Argentina for the next several years, in a reign notorious for human rights abuses and one of the worst financial crises in the nation's history. Booting up April, Apple Computer was founded in Los Altos, California, by Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne on the 1st. Their first product, the Apple I, was designed and built by Wozniak, entirely by hand. Jobs, a college dropout with no background in computing, set up the company in his parents' garage. He had an idea that the personal computer, which at the time was considered an extremely niche item for hobbyists, could become the indispensable product of the future. Stay tuned to see how that works out for him. Or just check out the logo on whatever device you're using to watch this video. Pretty good odds it might be a piece of fruit. The same day, experimental artist Max Ernst packed away his earthly brushes at age 84. A prolific Renaissance man, Ernst was a poet as well as a sculptor and painter, and is considered one of the fathers of Dadaism and Surrealism.
Charles Manson, the father, his family, and their legacy of Helter Skelter. Now, Lorimar Productions brings to full life Helter Skelter, the #1 bestseller, the true story of the Charles Manson murder.
Renowned industrialist, aviator, and film producer Howard Hughes passed away on April 5th at age 70. One of the most powerful and influential figures of the 20th century, Hughes spent the final decade of his life in extreme seclusion as a result of his declining mental and physical health. In fact, Hughes was so secretive during those last years that many didn't believe he had actually died, and conspiracy theories about the billionaire supposedly faking his death circulated for years.
Follow the money. What do you mean? Where? Oh, I can't tell you that.
Staying with books, literary horror author Anne Rice published her debut novel, Interview with the Vampire, on April 12th. The book was the first installment of Rice's popular Vampire Chronicles series and would go on to sell over 8 million copies. It was eventually adapted into a 1994 film of the same name, starring Tom Cruise and some unknown actor named Brad Pitt.
Flesh and blood, but not human.
Barbara Walters made broadcast history 10 days later, when she became the first female anchor of a nightly network newscast on the 22nd. Walter would co-anchor ABC Evening News with Harry Reasoner for the next 2 years, until a visible on-air tension between the two led her to leave the show in 1978. But don't worry, she landed on her feet. Walters would go on to become one of the most influential broadcast journalists and interviewers of the 20th century.
We'll be right back.
Radio Shack has the perfect gift for pedal pushers. The famous Archer bicycle radios that let you play Santa for as little as $9.95. Or give the original Road Patrol radio with built-in horn and reflector. Or really make them happy with this deluxe AM/FM model. All three disconnect quickly for safekeeping or off-bike use. Low-cost Archer bike radios. Only at Radio Shack, a Tandy company.
Former Yardbirds frontman Keith Relf accidentally electrocuted himself with his guitar on May 14th, passing away at age 33. Relf had been noodling around with his instrument in the basement when he stepped on a gas pipe. Because his guitar wasn't grounding, the contact with the metal pipe sent a fatal electric current through his body. Relf left behind an enduring music legacy with the Yardbirds, where he played alongside future giants Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, and Eric Clapton. Staying with the music theme, The Who played the loudest concert in recorded history at the time on the last day of May. The show, played at the Valley Stadium in Charlton, London, thrashed out an eardrum-destroying 126 decibels at a distance of 100 feet from the stage. For reference, a jet engine clocks in at around 150 decibels. Guess we know why Tommy was deaf. The concert earned The Who the nickname the loudest band in the world. Controversial billionaire and Timeline recurring character J. Paul Getty kicked the extremely wealthy bucket on the 6th of June. The abduction of Getty's grandson, J. Paul Getty III, and Getty's subsequent refusal to pay his grandson's ransom had dominated headlines 3 years earlier. An avid art collector, Getty left a sizable chunk of his massive fortune, still considered to be one of the largest personal fortunes in history, to the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles, California.
Damien, I love you! Look at me, Damien. It's all for you.
It's time for the Family Feud.
Sexy garment worn by women. 3 answers remain.
How about high boots? Boots?
Tells me a little more about you than the old high boot. Sure.
Baseball legend Hank Aaron hit the final home run of his storied career on the 20th of July. Aaron swatted his 755th dinger while playing for the Milwaukee Brewers in a game against the California Angels. He hung up his bat at the end of the 1976 season, but would continue in Major League Baseball as an executive for the Atlanta Braves, where he had played for most of his career. Finishing out July, a notorious name claimed his first victim on the 29th. 18-year-old Donna Lauria and 19-year-old Jody Valenti were sitting in a car just after 1 a.m. when a strange man approached them and opened fire with a .44 caliber pistol. Lauria perished instantly, but Valenti survived and gave a description of her attacker. The murderer would come to be known as the Son of Sam, coined in a series of letters he mailed to police, and would terrorize New York City for an entire year. On the same day, and staying with sports, famed Formula One driver Niki Lauda suffered a shocking crash at the German Grand Prix. Lauda's car went off the track on a sharp curve and caught fire, with Lauda trapped inside. Italian driver Arturo Merzario managed to pull him out, but not before Lauda suffered severe burns that resulted in the loss of one ear and both eyelids. Everyone was so certain Lauda's ticket had been punched that he was actually given last rites at the hospital. But the driver made a full recovery and returned to racing just 6 weeks later.
We'll be right back.
What makes this television different from any other in the world? This button. It brings you a home video game built in, a Magnavox exclusive. One touch and it's Magnavox Color TV with a color picture of astonishing clarity. Touch again, and it's Odyssey, America's favorite home video game. Why settle for just color TV when now you can have a built-in home video game too? Only from Magnavox.
Oh, wait, man. Look, Millie will be here in case Dee comes on back here. Now, come on, let's get going. Say what?
I'm not going out there alone at night.
Don't tell me you're afraid, little brother.
All right, Raj, you tell him.
He's afraid.
Thank you, Raj.
Esteemed television journalist Tom Brokaw joined the Today Show on August 30th. Brokaw would co-anchor the show with Jane Pauley for the next 5 years. A relatively new face in news media at the time, Brokaw would go on to become one of the most recognizable and trusted media figures of the 20th century.
Hey, Fonzie, can you get that?
I get it, Kermit. Hello, the Muppet Show backstage.
Who was it?
The water department.
Mao Zedong, the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party and one of the most prominent figures of the Cold War, passed away at the wizened age of 82. Initially a staunchy enemy of all things Western, towards the end of his life, Chairman Mao began to view the Soviet Union as a greater threat to China than the United States, and had begun to try and repair relations with America, which had resulted in President Richard Nixon's visit to the communist nation 4 years earlier. The next day, outspoken screenwriter Dalton Trumbo dotted his last I, passing away at age 70. Trumbo had been a major figure of the Hollywood blacklist when Congress appointed the House Un-American Activities Committee to investigate the threat of secret communist influence that had allegedly infiltrated the motion picture industry. Trumbo had refused to testify before the committee and was briefly imprisoned. He and several others suspected of being communist agents were blacklisted from working in film for the next few decades. 7 days later, NASA unveiled its first space shuttle, the appropriately named Enterprise. The $10 billion shuttle was revealed during a ceremony at Rockwell International's manufacturing plant in Palmdale, California, which was attended by the cast of Star Trek. Except for Shatner, he will not be upstaged, even by NASA.
How are you going to stop me?
Keep shorts on, Mel. I ordered a hamburger. What's this?
What's the difference? It's dead.
I'm not so sure.
To finish out September, musician Jerry Lee Lewis shot his bass player Butch Owens in the chest on the 29th. But not to finish Owens, who survived what Lewis insisted was an accidental shooting. Lewis was no stranger to unfavorable headlines. He'd previously earned stacks of notoriety for marrying his 13-year-old cousin Myra, and for the mysterious demise of 2 of his other wives, including many other run-ins with the law. You think there's a reason Lewis was nicknamed the Killer? Speaking of which, the Supreme Court rescinded its ban on the death penalty on the 4th of October. The ban had previously been set 4 years earlier in the case of Furman v. Georgia, in which the court ruled that the death penalty constituted cruel and unusual punishment. However, the capital sentences that had been reduced to life imprisonment by the ban weren't reinstated, most notably that of Charles Manson. Now, there's some luck, Chuck. 2 days later, terrorists attacked Cubana Flight 455 while the plane was en route to Jamaica from Barbados. 2 bombs detonated mid-flight, plunging the aircraft into the sea and claiming the lives of all 73 people on board, including all 24 members of Cuba's national fencing team, who had just swept the Central American and Caribbean Championships. Officially, the attack was credited to the group the Coordination of United Revolutionary Organizations, although rumors swirled that the CIA may have been involved. Speaking of frightening developments, the Ebola virus was identified for the first time under a microscope on the unluckiest day of the spookiest month. CDC virologist Frederick A. Murphy took a look at what he thought was a sample of Marburg virus from Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, only to see the now famous shepherd's crook shape. According to the World Health Organization, the virus has a mortality rate of anywhere from 25 to 90%, and there have been over 24 outbreaks of Ebola since its discovery.
We'll be right back.
introduces the brand new Pinto Pony MPG. This 2.3-liter Pinto has a wider stance, more road-hugging weight, and a bigger engine than Datsun B210, Toyota Corolla, Honda, Opel, Fiat, VW Beetle, Rabbit, Dasher, and Chevette, yet still has EPA estimates of 38 miles per gallon highway, 25 city. Your actual mileage may vary. The Pinto Pony MPG. The closer you look, the better we look.
Jimmy Carter was elected the 39th President of the United States on November 2nd. Carter, the Democratic governor of Georgia, narrowly defeated incumbent Gerald Ford, who, after escaping 2 assassination attempts the previous year, was probably relieved to be done with the job.
I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being.
In mid-November, Spain's parliament voted in favor of establishing a democracy after nearly 4 decades of dictatorship under Francisco Franco. The vote, which passed 429 to 59, dismantled Franco's fascist government almost 1 year to the day after his death the previous November. The country would hold its first democratic election since 1936 the following June.
Okay, I'm going to tell you, because you had the talent to become a good fighter, and instead of that, you became a leg breaker, some cheap second-rate loan shark.
It's a living?
It's a waste of life.
Comic strip Kathy made its debut in newspapers 4 days later, on November the 22nd. The strip, created by an advertising vice president named Kathy Guyswhite, poked fun at the daily struggles of being a modern single woman. Kathy would appear in over 1,400 newspapers and be spun off into 3 primetime specials before ending its 34-year run in 2010. By official count, 2 of the many Kathy comic strips that were produced are actually funny. Popular Canadian-American rock group The Band held their farewell concert on Thanksgiving Day at San Francisco's Winterland Ballroom. Dubbed The Last Waltz, the concert featured guest appearances by several other famous musicians, including Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Eric Clapton, Muddy Waters, and Ringo Starr. In addition to providing turkey dinners for all 5,000 of the concert's attendees, the show was filmed by an up-and-coming filmmaker named Martin Scorsese and released as a documentary film 2 years later. Moving into December, the cigar's most famous brand ambassador, Fidel Castro, became president of Cuba on the 2nd. Previously serving as Prime Minister of Cuba since 1959, Castro would retain the office of President of the Council of State and President of the Council of Ministers until 2008, when he stepped aside and let his brother Raul Castro take over. Oh, that's weird how that worked out. Castro would remain the first Secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba, a title he'd held since 1961, until his death in 2011.
Don't look down.
Come on out and see how it feels in the lights.
No! There aren't any lights.
You want lights? Hey, give her lights!
Anti-apartheid activist Winnie Mandela was banished from Johannesburg on December 28th. Mandela, the second wife of fellow activist and future South African President Nelson Mandela, was forcibly relocated by the country's apartheid government and confined to Brandfort, a small remote town in the Orange Free State, now the Free State Province. Her banishment was just the more recent form of abuse and harassment she'd endured as a result of her activism. She'd previously been imprisoned, tortured, placed under house arrest, and surveilled by the government. Although her activism would continue unabated, Mandela would remain confined to Brandfort for the next 8 years. And so 1976 boogied out the door after one last waltz with a few new presidents. 1977 was up next on the jukebox, bringing with it a landmark television event, one of the biggest albums ever recorded, and an exciting adventure in a galaxy far, far away. But that's next year. Coming soon, 1977. 1977 made it clear from the word go that a whole lot of things were about to change. A newly elected president made dramatic moves to heal an ailing nation. One of the biggest icons of the 20th century was laid to rest, and snow fell in Miami. Like actual snow, not the kind of snow Crockett and Tubbs normally dealt with. It was a year of dramatic debuts, escapes, and departures. And we don't mean people coming and going from the roller rink. Okay, we don't just mean that. It was also the year that audiences around the world were first transported to a galaxy far, far away, and the relationship between grown adults and action figures would never be the same again. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. Get ready to hitch a ride to Tashi Station to pick up some power converters, because this episode is all about 1977. Now fire up that Atari, because this is 1977. Starting the year would make us all mad as hell as actor Peter Finch passed away on the 14th. Finch had appeared on The Tonight Show the night before he succumbed to a heart attack in his hotel. Later that year, Finch would become the first actor to win a posthumous Oscar, nabbing a gold statue for his role in Network, which was the movie he had been on The Tonight Show to promote.
My dear Tattoo, when each guest is paying $50,000 for a 3-day stay on Fantasy Island, he or she deserves miracles.
Snow fell in Miami for the first time in recorded history on January 19th, as an Arctic cold front swept through the Sunshine State. Previously, the furthest south snow had ever fallen in Florida was near Fort Myers, back in 1899. So yeah, it was kind of a big deal. Speaking of firsts, President Jimmy Carter pardoned hundreds of thousands of American men who evaded the draft during the Vietnam War in his first month in office. Carter had promised to pardon draft dodgers as part of his presidential campaign, arguing that it would help move the country forward and heal the wounds of the divisive and costly conflict.
No, that's your African name. Must give you a new name. Must say, you name Toby. Hey, what's the matter with you? Cut me loose. Kunta Kinte.
Moving into February, disasters struck on the 4th, when 4 cars of a loop elevated train in Chicago jumped the track in the middle of rush hour. The accident claimed the lives of 11 commuters and injured 200 others. Over 40 years later, it remains the worst elevated train disaster in the history of the Chicago Transit Authority. Disaster of a more artistic sort struck that same day, when Fleetwood Mac released their groundbreaking album, Rumors. Recorded over an 11-month period that saw the band's 5 members get really into illicit substances and implode their personal relationships. But it was all worth it for music lovers. Rumors went on to top the Billboard charts for 31 weeks, score an Album of the Year Grammy, and sell more than 40 million copies, making it one of the best-selling albums ever produced. Moving into the world of sports, boxer Sugar Ray Leonard made his professional debut on the 5th of February, stepping into the ring with Louis the Bull Vega at the Civic Center in Baltimore. However, Leonard had won a gold medal in the Olympics as a light welterweight the previous year, so he wasn't exactly a novice. He defeated Vega by unanimous decision, beginning a 20-year career that would earn him the reputation as one of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters of all time. 3 days later, adult magazine publisher Larry Flynt was sentenced to 7 years on obscenity and organized crime charges, the organized crime being the distribution of Flynt's Hustler magazine. The sentence was overturned, and Flynt was released after serving only 6 days in jail. The trial was one of several brushes with the law Flynt had due to the graphic content of his magazine, and would eventually get a movie in 1996's The People vs. Larry Flynt, starring Woody Harrelson as Flynt. The real-life Flynt has a cameo as Judge William Morrissey, the man who handed him the 7-year prison sentence. Just over 3 weeks later, Pistol Pete Maravich set an NBA record on February 25th, when he scored 68 points against the New York Knicks, the most ever for a guard at the time. Maravich's record-setting game was played before the three-point line existed, which makes it all the more impressive. To this day, Maravich is one of only 8 NBA players to score 68 points or more during a single game. The first killer whale born in captivity came into this world on the 28th. Marineland of the Pacific's star attraction, Corky 2, unexpectedly gave birth to a calf, but sadly the baby only lived for 11 days. And while Marineland of the Pacific closed its doors for good in 1987, Corky 2 is still alive and kicking, or flipping, I suppose. At approximately 57 years of age, she is the oldest living orca in captivity. Moving into March, Bank of America adopted the name Visa for its credit card program on the 1st. Previously, the card had been known as the Bank Americard, and was a joint program with several other financial institutions. Why Visa? The company's founders believed the word was simple enough to be recognized in any language. That prediction turned out to be true. Today, Visa is the second largest bank card organization in the world. Hey, it's everywhere you want to be. The next day, Jay Leno made his first appearance on The Tonight Show on the 2nd of March. Leno's stand-up featured observational one-liners about current events, punctuated by some playful crowd work. All elements that would become staples of his opening monologues 15 years later, when Leno took over hosting duties from Carson on May 25, 1992.
We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Chuck Connors, and this is Tin Can Alley. An exciting new electronic target game that truly tests your marksmanship from as far away as 25 feet.
Good evening.
Good morning.
Good Lord, is it morning?
Yes, it is. And if you don't mind a stupid question, who are you?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Jack. Jack Tripper.
Elvis Presley departed for his final tour on the 23rd of March. Despite being in poor health, the king of rock and roll embarked on an aggressive national tour just 1 month after a series of dates throughout the South. The shows were marred by Elvis's declining condition. Disappointed fans and music journalists alike remarked that the singer was lethargic and difficult to understand. He would have to be hospitalized partway through the tour and have to cancel several dates before playing his final show on June 26th at the Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana. One day after Elvis left for his final string of performances, Lily Tomlin became the first woman to appear in a solo Broadway show. Appearing Nightly, which Tomlin co-wrote with Jane Wagner, debuted at the Biltmore Theater on the 24th. She would go on to win a Tony Award for her work on the show. 2 Boeing 747s collided on the runway at Tenerife Airport in Spain on March 27th. The crash occurred due to a miscommunication that caused one aircraft to initiate takeoff while the other was still in its path. The collision claimed the lives of 583 people, making it the worst accident in aviation history. Returning to sports, the Seattle Mariners kicked off the month of April by playing their first game ever on the 6th. The expansion team was added to the American League as the result of a lawsuit that originated when the Seattle Pilots were purchased and relocated to Milwaukee by Bud Selig. The team became the Brewers, one of only 6 teams in Major League Baseball that has yet to win a World Series, along with the Mariners. It was a month of firsts for Major League Baseball, as the Toronto Blue Jays played their first game the very next day. Initially one of 2 Canadian-based teams, today the Blue Jays are the only organization in the MLB located outside the United States, after the Montreal Expos became the Washington Nationals in 2005. Sorry, Canada. Author Alex Haley won the Pulitzer Prize on April 18th for his work on the iconic novel Roots. A fictionalized version of Haley's own family history, the best-selling novel was adapted into a record-breaking miniseries earlier the same year.
Hi.
Oh, hi. Hi.
Well, bye.
The beloved musical Annie opened for the first time at New York City's Alvin Theater 3 days later, on the 21st. Based on the long-running comic strip, Little Orphan Annie, the musical ran for a record-setting 6 years, scoring 7 Tony Awards. The musical has been adapted several times, most notably into the 1982 John Huston film featuring Albert Finney and Carol Burnett. Moving into the summer, volatile screen legend Joan Crawford passed away on the 10th of May in her apartment in New York City. One of the biggest stars of Hollywood's golden age, the controversial actress had become a recluse in her later years and had withdrawn almost entirely from the public eye. Crawford's acrimonious relationship with her children, particularly her eldest daughter, led to the infamous tell-all book Mommy Dearest, later adapted into a film starring Faye Dunaway. A young DJ named Howard Stern began broadcasting at WRNW in New York on Friday the 13th. Stern had initially served as a part-time host, filling in during the holiday season the previous year, but took over a 4-hour midday shift 6 days a week. It was the beginning of Stern's career as a notorious shock jock, which is still going strong nearly 50 years later.
The problem is that Coors beer, you take that east of Texas, and that's bootlegging.
You know, I believe you're just a little bit scared.
That's great psychology. Why don't you just say something bad about my mother?
Too short for a stormtrooper?
Huh? Oh, the uniform.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
You're who?
I'm here to rescue you. I've got your R2 unit. I'm here with Ben Kenobi.
Ben Kenobi? Where is he?
Come on.
Amateur mountain climber George Willig made history on May 26th when he climbed the South Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City using specialized equipment he developed specifically for the climb. The completely unsanctioned stunt took nearly 4 hours, and Willig was arrested the instant he reached the top of the tower. However, the stunt had captured national attention and made Willig a celebrity, earning him several television appearances and the nickname The Human Fly. He was ultimately let off with a slap on the wrist, a fine of 1 penny per floor he'd climbed, for a grand total of $1.10. Punk band The Sex Pistols released their second single, God Save the Queen, the next day. The song, which contains incendiary lyrics about Queen Elizabeth II and monarchies in general, and was pointedly released during the Queen's Silver Jubilee, was immediately banned by the BBC and many other radio stations in the United Kingdom. But it wasn't just radio stations that were offended. Singer Johnny Rotten and drummer Paul Cook were both attacked on separate occasions by random Brits enraged by the song. That kind of seems pretty punk. God Save the Queen holds the dubious distinction of being one of the most banned records in the history of music. Speaking of notoriety, James Earl Ray, the man convicted of assassinating Martin Luther King Jr., escaped from Tennessee's Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary on the 10th of June. Ray fled the prison with 6 other inmates, but he was quickly recaptured 3 days later after being tracked down by bloodhounds. It was actually the second time Ray had broken out of jail. He'd previously escaped from the Missouri State Penitentiary in 1967 by hiding in a bread truck, where he'd been serving a 20-year sentence for armed robbery, and was still on the run when he took the civil rights leader's life. Just over 2 weeks later, the Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision allowing lawyers to advertise their services. That probably seems weird, because most of us can't conceive of a world in which we don't have the commercial jingle of our hometown personal injury law firm memorized. But prior to that ruling, lawyers were bound by an antiquated bar association tradition that argued they should build up their clientele through good work and word of mouth. Well, those are antiquated ideals. Billboards, bus ads, and local TV spots haven't been the same since.
Hounds of justice!
Vladimir Nabokov kicked off the month of July by, well, kicking off. The Russian-American novelist and author of the controversial 1955 novel Lolita passed away on the 2nd at age 78 at the Montreux Palace Hotel in Switzerland. He had been in the middle of working on a new novel titled The Original of Laura, which was published in its incomplete form in 2009.
007 Triple X. Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British end up, sir.
We'll be right back.
I drink Dr. Pepper and I'm proud. I'm part of an original crowd. And if you look around these days, there seems to be a Dr. Pepper craze. I'm a pepper, he's a pepper, she's a pepper, we're a pepper. Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? I'm a pepper, he's a pepper, she's a pepper. If you drink Dr. Pepper, you're a pepper too. Be a pepper, drink Dr. Pepper. Be a pepper, drink.
The CIA unwillingly revealed its involvement in mind control experiments after 20,000 pages of documents were discovered following a Freedom of Information Act request on July 15th. CIA Director Richard Helms had previously ordered the destruction of all documents related to the project, known as MK-Ultra. But this cache of documents had been misfiled or hidden, leading to their discovery. The project involved the study of the effects of different drugs and procedures on humans, with the goal of identifying ways to make subjects more pliable during interrogation. MK-Ultra has subsequently been the basis of several conspiracy theories, and 1 or 2 TV shows as well. Powering up the month of August, President Carter established the U.S. Department of Energy on the 4th. The move was intended to help America recover from the unprecedented energy crisis of the 1970s by promoting energy development, conservation, and regulation, and decreasing the nation's dependence on fossil fuels, as many Americans were still feeling the effects of the 1973 oil embargo. The DOE was tasked with researching new energy technologies, as well as supporting nuclear weapons research. So, it wasn't all about putting solar panels on the White House. 6 days later, David Berkowitz, aka the Son of Sam, was arrested while leaving his home in Yonkers. The 24-year-old Berkowitz had terrorized New York City for an entire year by ambushing unsuspecting victims, usually couples, and opening fire on them with a .44 caliber handgun. Berkowitz was convicted and sentenced to 6 life sentences. 5 days later, a notorious Nazi escaped from custody, hidden inside a suitcase. Herbert Kappler, the head of the SS in Rome during World War II, was carried out of an Italian hospital by his wife. Kappler had been serving a life sentence in a military prison in Italy after being convicted by a war tribunal, but had been transferred to the hospital after he was diagnosed with cancer. Because of his rapidly declining condition, the West German government declined to extradite him back to Italy, and he succumbed to his illness just 6 months after his escape. No word on whether he was carried out of his home in a fabulous luggage set. 1 day later, the king of rock and roll passed away at his home in Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis Presley was found unresponsive on the floor of his Graceland mansion, having succumbed to a heart attack at the age of 42. He was buried on the grounds of Graceland, which remains open to this day as a tourist attraction. A more welcome departure occurred 4 days later, when NASA launched the Voyager 2 probe on August 20th towards Jupiter, Neptune, and Uranus. To date, Voyager 2 is the only craft to visit the 2 furthest planets of our solar system, and it's still functioning. It left the solar system in 2018, and despite a few hiccups, it remains in contact with Earth as it continues on its interstellar mission. Comedy icon Groucho Marx delivered his final punchline on the 19th at age 86. One of the most recognizable stars of his era, thanks to his trademark eyebrows and mustache and perpetual cigar, Groucho's rapid-fire delivery and dizzying wordplay helped make the Marx Brothers a household name.
Hello, I must be going.
Bridging the gap into September, President Carter signed the Panama Canal Treaties on the 7th. The treaties would turn over control of the canal to Panama after 1999, but also guarantee the United States the right to defend neutral access to the canal in perpetuity. The decision was controversial. Many prominent political figures, including future President Ronald Reagan, viewed it as relinquishing a valuable asset to a potential enemy. But the treaties were upheld, and jurisdiction of the canal was handed over to Panama on December 31st, 1999. 3 days later, France sent the last person to the guillotine when Hamida Jandoubi was executed on the 10th. Jandoubi had been convicted in the abduction and slaying of Elisabeth Bousquet earlier that year. His sentence marked the final time the guillotine was used for capital punishment in France. 4 years later, France would outlaw the death penalty altogether. Atari released their first game console, the Atari 2600, on September 11th. Initially called Atari VCS, or Video Computer System, the console quickly became the dominant force in home gaming, and would remain at the top for the next several years, until a certain mustachioed plumber came along.
You almost closed the book.
Stunned. It was beautiful. Come on, admit it.
Welcome aboard the Love Boat. The what? Oh, that's just a little nickname we have. Doctor, in my presence, don't ever call this ship a love boat.
The supersonic Concorde jet made its first landing in New York City on October 20th, touching down at 11:12 a.m. at Kennedy International Airport. The jet took off from Toulouse, France, making the 3,800-mile trip across the Atlantic Ocean in 3 hours and 45 minutes. Despite the appeal of a high-speed transatlantic flight, the Concorde was met with stiff opposition from New York City residents, who objected to the incredibly high decibel levels the plane generated during takeoff. It's tough to argue with them. The plane generated actual sonic booms, like a Street Fighter II character. Speaking of planes, 3 members of the southern rock band Leonard Skinner perished when their chartered Convair 240 crashed in Mississippi that same day. The band was flying from South Carolina to Louisiana for a show when their plane ran out of fuel and had to make an emergency landing. The airline collided with the tree line and broke apart. Lead vocalist Ronnie Van Zant, guitarist Steve Gaines, and Gaines' sister, backup vocalist Cassie Gaines, died instantly, along with both pilots and the band's tour manager. Popular singer and Oscar-winning actor Bing Crosby crooned his final song on October 14th. One of the most popular entertainers of the first half of the 20th century, Crosby collapsed on a golf course in Spain after playing 18 holes, succumbing to a heart attack at age 74. President Carter raised the U.S. minimum wage to $3.35 an hour on the first day of November, just in time for Black Friday. The new figure was $1.05 higher than the previous minimum wage of $2.30, an increase of nearly 50%. That's no small potatoes. Or peanuts. You know, because we're talking about Jimmy Carter.
Okay, listen. I like it. We could dance together. That's it. We could just dance together and nothing more, nothing personal. I don't want you coming on to me.
Why not?
Because I don't think guys like you anymore, for one thing.
English folk musician Cat Stevens converted to Islam on December 23rd, leaving the music industry behind him for the next 2 decades. Following a near-death experience the previous year and what he later described as a lifelong search for spiritual meaning, Stevens subsequently changed his name to Yusuf Islam. With the exception of a charity concert in Wembley Stadium in 1979, he did not perform again for 25 years. Arguably one of the most famous entertainers to have ever lived, Charlie Chaplin passed away on Christmas Day at age 88. The silent film star dominated Hollywood in its early years, but he left the United States after a series of controversies and permanently relocated to Switzerland in the 1950s. The events of his life would later be dramatized in the 1992 film Chaplin, directed by Richard Attenborough, the guy from Jurassic Park, and starring Robert Downey Jr. Infamous serial killer Ted Bundy escaped from prison on the second-to-last day of 1977, climbing out through the ceiling of his Colorado jail cell. Bundy had been awaiting trial and had already escaped once before, leaping from a courthouse library in Aspen back in June. However, while he was quickly apprehended that first time, he would stay on the run for nearly 3 months, during which time his victim count would continue to rise. And so 1977 came to a close with the curtain call of a tramp and the most notorious predator in history on the loose. 1978 was pulling up late to the party, riding shotgun with a guy you wouldn't like when he's angry, a historic blizzard, and one of the most infamous accidents in the history of televised stunts. But that's next year. Coming soon, 1978. 1978 saw the decade begin to draw to a close, and it wasn't shaping up to be a particularly happy ending. The year was fraught with shocking acts of violence, including the grim origin of the phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid. But there were also a few bright spots, such as the debut of an exciting British rock three-piece, the first appearance of the most famous binge-eating cat in recorded history, and the release of some soon-to-be classic comedies that would begin to define the tone of pop culture in the 1980s. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports, and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. Get ready to learn about the inspiration behind several future Netflix documentaries, because this episode is all about 1978. Now get ready to believe a man can fly, because this is 1978. Harvey Milk became the first openly gay person to be elected to public office in California's history when he took his seat on San Francisco's Board of Supervisors on January 8th. Milk was an outspoken LGBTQ advocate, and during his time in office, he sponsored a successful bill that prohibited discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. But his time as a public servant would be cut short. More on that later in the year. The final Volkswagen Beetle to be manufactured in Germany rolled out of the factory just under 2 weeks later, on the 19th. Officially known as the Volkswagen Type 1, the popular automobile would continue to be manufactured in Brazil and Mexico until 2003, making it the longest-running and most manufactured car model in history. Far out, man. 11 days later, legendary talk show host Larry King went on the air nationwide for the first time when The Larry King Show premiered on the 30th. In a format that would become the bedrock of his career, King's daily show would begin with an interview with a guest and end with King taking calls from his listeners. The Larry King Show would stay on the air until 1994 and would be spun off into King's massively popular TV talk show, Larry King Live, in 1985. Embattled film director Roman Polanski fled the United States the next day, hopping a plane to London to avoid a prison sentence for unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor. Polanski pleaded guilty to the charge as part of a deal to avoid jail time, but he had heard that the judge intended to throw out the deal and slap him with a 50-year sentence. The director flew from London to his home country of France the following day, where he has mostly remained ever since. Less than a week later, the infamous blizzard of '78 struck the Northeast United States, burying the Midwest and East Coast in some serious snow. The storm lingered for 2 days, delivering record-breaking snowfalls of over 20 inches in several areas. By the time the storm broke up on February 7th, it had claimed approximately 100 lives and caused over $500 million in damage. A week later, the first micro-on-a-chip was patented by Texas Instruments on Valentine's Day. Well, that's romantic. Designed by Gary Boone and Michael Cochran, the chip was used in Texas Instruments' iconic educational toy Speak and Spell, which was unveiled 4 months later at the Consumer Electronics Show. E.T. would later use this revolutionary technology in the 80s to phone home. 10-1 underdog Leon Spinks defeated the reigning heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali the next day. Spinks outlasted the legendary champ, winning by decision, becoming the first person ever to strip Ali of his world title in the ring. However, Spinks would lose that title just over a month later, when he refused to defend his heavyweight belt against #1 contender Ken Norton. March kicked off with a bizarre heist. 2 auto mechanics stole the earthly remains of Charlie Chaplin on the 1st. The 2 men exhumed the famed filmmaker's casket and attempted to ransom it to Chaplin's widow, Una, for $600,000. She refused, which turned out to be the right move. The culprits were caught just 5 weeks later, and Chaplin was reburied in a concrete grave to prevent future criminal entrepreneurs from getting any ideas. Notorious Hustler magazine publisher Larry Flynt was wounded by a sniper on the 6th of March. Flynt and his lawyer were struck by gunfire outside of a courthouse in Gwinnett County, Georgia, where Flynt was scheduled to appear to fight obscenity charges. Although both men survived the attack, Flynt was left partially paralyzed and had difficulty speaking for the rest of his life.
We'll be right back.
Hey, this Christmas party is getting a little too quiet. I think it's time we liven it up with my favorite Christmas gift, Mr. Microphone.
Hey, what's that?
Well, you set the dial on your FM radio and testing.
Hey, I'm on the radio!
The perfect Christmas gift at Walgreens, Woolworth, Woolco, Osco, Venture, Weebolts, Montgomery Ward.
David Banner is believed to be dead, and he must let the world think that he is dead until he can find a way to control the raging spirit that dwells within him.
Tragedy struck on March 22nd when famed high-wire performer Carl Wallenda fell while performing a televised tightrope walk between 2 towers of the Condado Plaza Hotel in Puerto Rico. Wallenda was the founding member and patriarch of the Flying Wallendas, a family of daredevil performers known for their thrilling stunts, which were usually done without any safety nets. That was the case when Wallenda fatally plummeted 121 feet from the Condado Hotel, succumbing to his injuries at age 73.
Because bringing happiness is the only thing that's important to me. So don't be surprised if I show up on your unhappy doorstep someday. Better yet, be surprised, because I'm not doing this again.
Breaking off antennas, stealing pantyhose. Who would do something like that?
Probably the notorious car antenna pantyhose gang.
You try getting along without your car radio.
Well, try getting along without your pantyhose.
This is work, honey. I told you I'm Ewing Oil's Goodwill Ambassador.
Got a whole satchel full of goodwill there.
Yeah, Daddy calls them bees. Booze, broads, and booty. It's what keeps the independent oilman independent.
Moving into April, influential astronomer and writer Carl Sagan won a Pulitzer Prize on the 17th of April for his nonfiction book, The Dragons of Eden, about the evolution of human intelligence. Sagan would later use some of the same ideas from his prize-winning book in his popular miniseries, Cosmos. The Dragons of Eden would eventually get a sequel when, 24 years later, the follow-up book Up From Dragons was published, co-written by Sagan's son, Dorion. Back in '78, May saw the breakout film of an unknown martial arts star named Jackie Chan. Chan's action comedy, Snake in the Eagle's Shadow, was released on the 1st, introducing audiences around the world to his signature slapstick fighting style for the first time. We've been injuring ourselves and spinning ladders ever since. The first ever spam email was sent 2 days later on the 3rd. The message was sent by Gary Thurrock, a marketer working for Digital Equipment Corporation, who bombed the inboxes of nearly 400 ARPANET users, trying to get them to come to some sweet sales presentation for the company's line of computers. And with that click of the send button, Nigerian princes were given their most formidable weapon. Later that month, the phrase glass ceiling was coined for the first time on the 24th by a New York telephone company manager named Marilyn Loden. Loden was speaking on a panel at the 1978 Women's Exposition in New York when she used the phrase to describe the invisible barrier preventing women from advancing as far as men in their chosen careers.
Well, different work now. Let's get to it.
Tonight, Geraldo Rivera reports on how greyhound racing dogs get their taste for the chase. A grisly sport, but it has its fans.
Sandy! Teddy? What are you doing here? I thought you were going back to Australia.
We had a change of plans.
I can't... Well, that's cool, baby.
Moving into June, the very first Garfield comic strip was published on the 19th, and the cubicle walls of your unfunny coworkers have never been the same since. Created by cartoonist Jim Davis, the daily adventures of a sarcastic cat and his dim-witted owner quickly became one of the most popular comic strips in history, at one point appearing in over 2,500 newspapers, multiple television specials, cartoon series, and live-action movies, and generating nearly $1 billion in annual merchandising revenue. That is a lot of lasagna.
We'll be right back.
Zonk, if you want a date, get in shape.
Shape? I'm solid steel.
Chic shape, Zonk. Chic shape.
Get clean, get close, get comfort too. Get your face in chic shape.
Click in Chic Super 2, the only twin blades Teflon coated for incredibly comfortable close shaves.
Great shape, Zonk.
That's chic shape.
That's Super 2.
The first rainbow pride flag was used at the Gay and Lesbian Freedom Day Parade in San Francisco. Created by a clothing designer named Gilbert Baker as a new symbol for the city's LGBT community, the flag immediately resonated with the parade goers and was adopted as an icon of gay pride.
I'm a zit. Get it?
Now, George Romero brings us the most intensely shocking motion picture experience for all times, Dawn of the Dead.
Moving into the fall, The Who's Party Boy drummer Keith Moon finally self-destructed on the 7th. Long suffering from alcoholism, Moon had moved into a new flat in London to try and get sober with the help of a prescription sedative used to treat alcohol withdrawal. Moon's addictive personality was no match for the powerful medication, and he OD'd, passing away at the age of 32. 3 days later, Mario Andretti won his first Formula One World Drivers' Championship, coming in ahead of Austrian driver Niki Lauda, who you may remember from an earlier Timeline episode. Andretti would go on to become one of the most famous drivers in the history of professional racing, having claimed victories in Formula One, NASCAR, and IndyCar. He also had 3 guest appearances on Home Improvement. That's when you know you've really hit the big time. The next day, the last known victim of smallpox succumbed to the disease, one of the deadliest afflictions in human history. Medical photographer Janet Parker contracted the malignant virus from the smallpox laboratory where she worked. The head of the lab, Professor Henry Bedson, was so distraught over Parker's infection that he took his own life just a few days before she passed away. The World Health Organization officially declared smallpox eradicated in 1980.
Oh no!
No. It's just that they told me I'd be starting work today as a driver. Oh, here's my hack license.
You're a cab driver? What do you mean busting my chops here, make them believe you're a regular person?
Turning to music, the Grateful Dead played 3 nights of concert at the Giza Pyramid Complex in Cairo, Egypt, beginning the night of September 14th. The proceeds of the show were donated to the Egyptian Department of Antiquities and to the Faith and Hope Society, the favorite charity of Egypt's then First Lady, Jihan Sadat. Originally intended to be recorded and released as a live album, those plans were shelved for various technical and logistical reasons until the album was finally released 30 years later, almost to the day, on September 30th, 2008.
Hello? Hello? Anybody in there? Little hatchling brothers, you must revolt against your oppressors. You have nothing to lose but your shells.
In the great tradition of these laugh masters of the past come 2 guys who are hysterically funny. They're Cheech and Chong.
In late September, Pope John Paul I unexpectedly passed away on the 28th after serving just 33 days. The September Pope, as he came to be known, relinquished the papacy after succumbing to a sudden heart attack at age 65. He was succeeded by Pope John Paul II, hey, that's chronological, who was elected just over 2 weeks later on October 16th. John Paul II would go on to become the second longest serving pope in modern history, wearing the big pointy hat for 27 years until his death in 2005. Heading into October, the Sex Pistols' infamous bassist, Sid Vicious, was charged with the second-degree murder of his girlfriend, Nancy Spungen. Spungen had been found in the couple's room in New York's Hotel Chelsea by staff the previous day with a stab wound to her abdomen. Vicious admitted to the attack, but his highly intoxicated state, combined with his differing accounts of the event, have kept the exact details a mystery to this day. Staying with music, English rock band The Police played their first U.S. show at New York City's CBGB's 8 days later. The show was part of an American tour, during which the then unknown band drove themselves from city to city in an Econoline van. Wonder how many red lights they ran.
Say, what's your name? My name is Dorothy. Dorothy and Toto. What intelligent names. What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
Kicking off November with some tough love, the iconic documentary film Scared Straight premiered on television on the 2nd. Directed by Arnold Shapiro, the gritty film follows a group of juvenile offenders as they interact with real-life convicts at New Jersey's Rahway State Prison. The inmates scream at, berate, and otherwise terrify the teenagers in an effort to scare them straight by exposing them to the grueling realities of life behind bars. The film was notably aired uncensored, marking the first time certain 4-letter expletives were ever uttered on American network television.
We'll be right back.
We took everything that was wrong with children's television and got rid of it. We kept everything that was good about it and made it better. The result is Nickelodeon, the young people's satellite network.
Did you just hear what I heard? Her kids are in school in other countries, and she likes it that way.
Yeah, and we're in a lot of trouble.
What you talking about, Willis?
Washington, D.C. elected Marion Barry Jr. as the city's first black mayor on November the 7th. Barry had been a civil rights activist in the 1960s and had served as the president of the Lemoyne-Owens College chapter of the NAACP while he was a student there. The controversial politician would go on to serve 4 non-consecutive terms as D.C.'s mayor. 1 day later, legendary slice-of-life artist Norman Rockwell passed away at his home in Stockbridge, Massachusetts at age 84. Rockwell was best known for the covers he painted for the Saturday Evening Post, which presented an idyllic view of life in small-town America. At the time of his death, he had produced over 4,000 original works for magazines, movie posters, advertisements, and books, making him one of the most prolific artists of the modern era. Controversial cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead passed away 1 week later at age 76. Mead rose to prominence with her books Coming of Age in Samoa and Sex and Temperament in 3 Primate Societies, in which she argued that culture, rather than biology, had a profound effect on human development. and advocated for the relaxing of rigid sexual norms and gender roles in modern society. She also served as an assistant curator at New York's American Museum of Natural History for over 50 years, which is enough time to name all of the dinosaur skeletons.
That's it, I'm turning back. I know your family's waiting. I know it's an important day.
3 days later, cult leader Jim Jones directed and manipulated hundreds of his followers to take their own lives at his Jonestown commune in Guyana on November 18th. Jones became paranoid after U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan visited the commune to investigate allegations of abuse and illegal activity. Jones ordered the assassination of Ryan and his group, who were ambushed on an airstrip as they attempted to leave with some Jonestown defectors. Altogether, 909 lives were lost at Jonestown, including Ryan. San Francisco was struck by tragedy 8 days later, when newly elected Supervisor Harvey Milk was assassinated alongside Mayor George Moscone by disgruntled former Supervisor Dan White. White had resigned from his position weeks earlier in protest of the low salary, and had formed a rivalry with Milk over the course of the year. White claimed he had spiraled into a depression and wasn't fully in control of his actions, and was ultimately convicted, serving just 5 years in prison before taking his own life in 1985. Milk's life would later be the subject of an award-winning film, 2008's Milk, starring Sean Penn in the title role. 1 week later, Dianne Feinstein was named mayor of San Francisco, following the slaying of Mayor George Moscone. Feinstein had been serving as the president of the city's Board of Supervisors and had delivered the news of Milk's demise to her shocked constituents.
You remember the trees? Remember all the different ways of the trees? Remember that? You remember? Huh? The mountains? You remember all that?
One shot.
One shot. One shot.
God, look up there.
What the hell is that?
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me. Who's got you?
Nobody's favorite clown, John Wayne Gacy, was arrested on December 21st after confessing to the slaying of more than 30 teenage boys and young men. Gacy had been collecting victims for years. Police discovered several sets of remains buried in the crawlspace beneath his house. Gacy was ultimately convicted of 33 counts of homicide, at the time the most ever attributed to a single person. And so the sun set on 1978, with the cinematic debut of one of America's greatest heroes and the arrest of one of its worst villains. 1979 was on deck with a hip new portable music craze, the debut of 2 future NBA legends, and the arrival of the most significant political figure in modern American history. Yeah, old Rappin' Ronnie is on the way. But that's next year. Coming soon, 1979. The 1970s were drawing to a close, and like many decades, it had been a mixed bag. Although this time the bag probably had C-3PO on it. But 1979 wasn't about to go gently into that good night. The year saw the release of several classic movies, the last ride of a Hollywood legend, and the debut of 3 bona fide icons of modern professional sports. It also saw heightened political tensions, capping off the globally tumultuous 70s with a significant Soviet coup that would start toppling the dominoes, ultimately leading to a shocking September morning in New York City. And above it all loomed the specter of the impending 1980s, which began to take the shape of a folksy presidential candidate who liked to wear cowboy hats. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports, and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. Time to grab your Moonraker laser and jump the General Lee over 3 Mile Island, because this episode is all about 1979. Now get ready to find your rainbow connection, because this is 1979. Kicking off the year, Hilton Hotels founder Connie, if you watched Mad Men, Hilton checked out of this earthly plane on January 3rd. The man responsible for the first international hotel chain, and for Paris Hilton's music career, passed away, checking out late at age 91. Oof, he stuck around for a while, like a Hilton timeshare payment. 13 days later, the landmark nature series Life on Earth premiered on BBC One January 16th. The ambitious 13-episode documentary took 3 years to complete, using hundreds of hours of the highest quality footage available to chronicle the history of life on the planet. Life on Earth was such a success that it turned presenter David Attenborough into a household name and spawned decades of follow-up series under the Life banner. The first shot in the war of man versus machines was fired 9 days later, when the first documented case of a robot taking out a human in the United States occurred. 25-year-old factory worker Robert Williams was struck in the head by a robotic arm in a Ford Motor plant in Michigan. The accident was attributed to a lack of adequate safety measures, and Williams' family was awarded $10 million in damages. Meanwhile, the robot went right back to work as if nothing happened. Must have been a robo-senator's kid.
That's Bo and Luke Duke. And from the way they're duded up, they got something cooking. And you know it ain't girls, because it's still daylight.
Famed American businessman and former Vice President Nelson Rockefeller passed away on the 26th at age 70. Rumors began swirling after it was revealed that Rockefeller had collapsed in the presence of a 25-year-old aide named Megan Marshak, who had previously worked for him in Washington, D.C., and for whom he had recently purchased a Manhattan condo. Rockefeller? Oh, he barely knew her. Allegedly. Moving into February, Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious departed for the Great Dive Bar in the Sky on the 2nd. Vicious had recently been arrested for the murder of his girlfriend, Nancy Spungen, and had just been released from prison the day before. The punk rocker bought a bunch of H to celebrate and OD'd that night. The story of his brief life would eventually be adapted into a movie. The 1986 film Sid and Nancy, starring Gary Oldman and Chloe Webb as the doomed couple. Back to '79 and turning into music, the Village People had their biggest hit when their song YMCA peaked at number 2 on the Billboard music charts on February 3rd. The now iconic song was the only single off their album Cruisin', released in September of the previous year. It would be a good year for the Village People. They would have another song climb the charts a few months later, when In the Navy reached number 3 on May 19th. The sun set on nefarious Nazi scientist Josef Mengele on the 7th. Mengele's unscrupulous human experiments conducted during World War II earned him the nickname the Angel of Death. When a guy has a more intense nickname than Hitler, you know he's bad news. Mengele fled Germany in 1949 and spent the rest of his life hiding in South America, where he suffered a stroke while swimming and drowned in Brazil at age 67. 1 day later, the nuclear power facility at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania experienced a partial meltdown. Mechanical failures, design flaws, and operator errors all contributed to the accident, which remains the most significant nuclear incident in American history. Although no one was injured and the meltdown was contained before any serious long-lasting harm took effect, the incident was the beginning of the end of nuclear power plant construction in the States. Cleanup of the reactor would ultimately last 14 years and cost $1 billion. Pakistani President Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was executed at the beginning of the month, being hung in secrecy for the crime of conspiring to assassinate a political rival on the 4th. Bhutto had been deposed in a coup by General Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq 18 months earlier. Although he was a controversial figure who had served as both president and prime minister of Pakistan during a period of extreme unrest, the charges against him are generally agreed to have been bogus. Zia continued to serve as Pakistan's de facto president until he perished in a plane crash in 1988. President Jimmy Carter had an infamous run-in with a rabbit on April 20th. The rabbit in question was being pursued by dogs and swam out into the lake where Carter was fishing and tried to jump into his boat. The president shooed the wild beast away with his oar, creating a memorable image that became a popular news story that hurt his re-election campaign. The state of Georgia selected Ray Charles' version of the classic Georgia on My Mind to be the official state song on the 24th. Originally co-written and recorded by Hoagy Carmichael in 1930, Charles, a native son of Georgia, recorded a version of the song for his 1960 album, The Genius Hits the Road. It became a #1 Billboard hit, as well as the signature tune of Charles's career. Margaret Thatcher became the UK's first female prime minister when she was elected on the 4th of May. The leader of Great Britain's Conservative Party, Thatcher was a controversial figure, earning the nickname the Iron Lady due to her staunch politics. She wound up serving 3 terms, leaving office in 1990, making her the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century. Elton John became the first Western pop star to tour the Soviet Union when he kicked off 7 days' worth of shows on the 20th of May. The Rocket Man played 8 shows in Leningrad and Moscow. His final show of the tour was broadcast live via satellite across Europe by the BBC, and footage from the tour was used in a television documentary titled To Russia with Elton. Sticking with music, the Charlie Daniels Band released their signature hit, The Devil Went Down to Georgia, on the 21st. A blazing 3.5-minute southern rock tune about a skilled fiddle player making a deal with the devil, the song was certified platinum and has remained a pop culture mainstay ever since, and makes us all kind of want to fiddle. We go now to San Francisco, where on the 21st of May, the White Night riots erupted. The riots were the result of the conviction of former city supervisor Dan White, who you may remember was responsible for the 1978 assassination of San Francisco Mayor George Moscone and city supervisor and first open gay politician Harvey Milk. Protesters were outraged by White's conviction of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. The riots started as a peaceful march that escalated while outside of City Hall, and later at a bar called the Elephant Walk.
We'll be right back.
Wow, macaroni and cheese. Mine's spaghetti.
Beef noodles? My wife's a magician.
The trick is new Mugga Lunch from Betty Crocker. 3 tasty hot dishes you make in a mug, 1 helping at a time. Just add boiling water, wait 4 minutes, stir, and eat.
Mugga Lunch, new from Betty Crocker.
Funk band Chic released their chart-topping single, Good Times, on the 4th. The song hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and has gone on to become one of the most influential pieces of modern music, having been sampled more than almost any other song in music history, most notably by the Sugar Hill Gang in their 1979 hit, Rapper's Delight. John Wayne saddled up and hit the old dusty trail for the last time on June 11th. One of the most iconic movie stars in history, Wayne built a legendary career playing hard-edged Western heroes, like the grizzled Marshal Rooster Cogburn in 1969's True Grit. The Duke was 72. Rock legend Chuck Berry pleaded guilty to tax evasion on June 12th. The father of rock and roll admitted to having dodged payment of over $100,000 in income tax back in 1973 and was sentenced to 4 months in prison. Berry had just performed at the White House at President Carter's request 11 days earlier. Go, Johnny, go. Go and pay your taxes. In a landmark decision, the Sioux Nation received $100 million in compensation for Black Hills, South Dakota on June the 13th. The land was taken from the Sioux by the American government back in 1877 and is currently the site of Mount Rushmore National Memorial. Today, the settlement has grown to over $1 billion, but the Sioux Nation has never claimed it.
I'm Stetler. I'm Waldorf. We're here to heckle a Muppet movie.
Gentlemen, that's straight ahead. Private screening, room D.
Private screening? Yeah, they're afraid to show it in public.
Oh! You appear with the tedious inevitability of an unloved season.
I didn't think there were any seasons in space.
As far as you're concerned, only winter.
The greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, announced his 3rd retirement on June 27th. Ali insisted this time he was done with professional fighting for good, despite his earlier retirements that had turned out to be less than permanent. The 37-year-old heavyweight champ abdicated his world title in a letter to the World Boxing Association, but this time would turn out to be less than permanent as well. He would come out of retirement one more time to challenge Larry Holmes for the title on October 2nd, 1980. Dubbed the Last Hurrah, a visibly past his prime Ali lost in a 10th round TKO after his corner threw in the towel. The beginning of July saw the debut of Sony's Walkman. The brainchild of a Sony executive who just wanted a more portable way to listen to music while on the go, the Walkman started off slowly, but by the end of the summer was turning into a genuine phenomenon. The Walkman would go on to become one of the most successful products in the company's history and one of the most influential consumer electronics ever produced. The infamous Disco Demolition Night went down on the 12th of July. Baseball fans were lured to the Chicago White Sox's Comiskey Park with the promise of 98-cent ticket prices if they brought along a disco record to be destroyed on the field in between the 2 games. The event was spearheaded by local shock jock and avid disco hater Steve Dahl. When Dahl took the field to dramatically detonate the disco records, all hell broke loose, resulting in a riot that saw thousands of fans storm the field and trash the place. Needless to say, the promotion was not repeated.
Jonathan.
Max, what are you doing in that outfit?
Sorry, I didn't want to scare you.
Vocal tennis stars John McEnroe and Ilie Nastase faced off in an infamous U.S. Open match on August 30th. The match erupted into a memorable display of decidedly unsportsmanlike conduct, which wasn't much of a surprise considering the two competitors were nicknamed Super Brat and Nasty, respectively. At one point, Nastase, who was losing badly, refused to resume the match, stirring the crowd up into a near riot. The chaos continued to escalate until Nastase finally had the chair referee replaced, and the score reset to what it had been before he'd received a penalty for delaying the match. Nastase still lost.
Sports, entertainment, we're the newest network. ESPN, everything was seen.
British band The Police released their first #1 single, Message in a Bottle, on the 29th. The track became one of the band's signature hits, climbing to the top of the Billboard charts in the UK. Message in a Bottle remains one of the Police's best-known songs, and, according to interviews conducted over the years since its release, one of the band's personal favorites. The newly elected Pope John Paul II became the first pope to visit Ireland on the 29th. Like, ever. It was kind of a big deal. An estimated 2.7 million people greeted the Pope over the course of his 3-day visit, making it a major public event and one of the most significant in the history of modern Catholicism. Among other things, the Pope addressed the rising political violence in Northern Ireland as the Troubles raged on, urging his followers to reject brutality and remember the teachings of the Church.
Introducing Bo Derek.
Did you ever do a tour of Valsbolero?
In Blake Edwards, 10.
On October 11th, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded to Alan Cormack and Godfrey Hounsfield for their work in developing computer-assisted tomography, better known as the CAT scan. Yeah, they definitely deserve to win that one. The X-ray imaging technique is easily one of the most significant technological achievements in the history of modern medicine. Wayne Gretzky scored his first goal in the National Hockey League on October 14th. The Great One had previously played for Canada's World Hockey Association. During his inaugural NHL season, he went on to tie for the most goals scored by a single player and would win the Hart Memorial Trophy as the league's most valuable player, an award he would claim 7 more times during his career. Not to be outdone by those CAT scan guys, Mother Teresa was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize on October 17th. The famous Catholic nun and founder of the Missionaries of Charity dedicated her life to charity and hospice care, specifically for patients afflicted with tuberculosis, leprosy, and HIV and AIDS. Although some consider her a controversial figure, Mother Teresa would eventually be canonized by the Catholic Church, making her official title Saint Teresa of Calcutta. President Carter signed legislation creating the Department of Education on the 17th of October. The creation of the department had been one of Carter's campaign promises, establishing an entity to determine federal funding policies for American public schools, as well as research educational issues and collect information and statistics about American schooling. South Korean President Park Chung-hee was taken out on the 26th. The former general had served as the president of the Republic of Korea for nearly 20 years, after taking office in 1963 following a military coup. Lots of those going around. But his regime was oppressive and authoritarian, and his ticket was finally punched by his friend, Kim Jae-gyu, the head of the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, who shot Park and several of Park's bodyguards during a banquet dinner. Birmingham, Alabama elected its first black mayor on October 30th. Richard Arrington Jr., a former city council member and university professor with a doctorate in zoology, took office after a runoff election. He wound up being elected to a total of 5 terms, serving as the city's mayor for the next 20 years. The owners of the iconic disco nightclub Studio 54 pleaded guilty to income tax evasion on November the 2nd. Studio 54's reputation for debauchery, rampant drug use, and celebrity clientele made it a symbol for 1970s excess. But the party was over when its owners, Stephen Rubel and Ian Schrager, were convicted. Mirrors and rolled-up dollar bills would never be the same.
We'll be right back.
It's okay, you can have it.
No.
Really, you can have it.
Okay.
A Coke and a smile makes me feel good. Makes me feel nice.
See you around.
That's the way it should be. I like to see
Hey, kid.
the whole world is smiling with me. Coca-Cola as life. Have a Coke and
Thanks, Mean Joe.
smile.
We go to Tehran, where Iranian student demonstrators seized control of the U.S. Embassy on the 4th of November. Revolutionary group members were followers of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a devout anti-American cleric. The group held more than 60 Americans hostage for the next 444 days and didn't release them until just after Ronald Reagan's 1981 inaugural address, in what was interpreted as a big old FU to Jimmy Carter, who had allowed the deposed former Shah of Iran to come to America for cancer treatment. Ayatollah Khomeini, who famously dubbed the U.S. the Great Satan, would spend much of the next decade as the supreme leader of Iran.
Who could it be? Who could it be? I just can't imagine who. Could it be Satan?
North American Air Defense Command, or NORAD if you're nasty, issued a false alarm on the 9th of November that nearly triggered nuclear war. NORAD's missile warning system, designed to alert the American government if any ICBMs were launched by enemy nations, falsely reported to the Pentagon, Strategic Air Command, and others that 1,400 Soviet missiles were on their way to the United States. The mix-up occurred when a technician ran a test program but forgot to update the system to reflect this. That is a pretty big error. 3 days later, President Carter announced a halt to the importation of that oh-so-gooey and delicious petroleum from Iran, setting a potential threat to national security. The move was a response to the ongoing hostage crisis at the American Embassy in Tehran, and it effectively ended the cooperative relationship between the two nations. Smelling blood in the water, Ronald Reagan announced his candidacy for president the next day. Reagan, a former actor who had previously served 2 terms as the governor of California, had unsuccessfully run for president back in 1976, ultimately losing the Republican nomination to the then sitting president, Gerald Ford. Reagan's chances were looking much stronger now, particularly as the ongoing Iranian hostage crisis continued to erode President Carter's credibility as an effective leader. American Airlines Flight 444 was forced to make an emergency landing on November 15th, when a package sent by the Unabomber exploded in the plane's cargo hold mid-flight. Although no one was fatally injured, 12 passengers had to be treated for smoke inhalation. It was the 3rd attack made by the infamous terrorist, who would eventually be identified as Fyodor Kaczynski, a former mathematics professor turned anarchist. Kaczynski had detonated 2 previous packages at Northwestern University, earning him the FBI case identifier Unabomb, University and Airline Bomber. Oh, so that's where it comes from. The first artificial blood transfusion in the United States was administered at the University of Minnesota Hospital on the 20th. The patient, a 67-year-old Jehovah's Witness, had refused a traditional transfusion because it was against his religion. The man received a total of 6 pints of a blood substitute called Fluosol, which has the ability to carry and dissolve oxygen just like normal blood. On November 24th, a damning report by a government watchdog agency revealed that U.S. troops serving in the Vietnam War were indeed exposed to Agent Orange, contrary to what the Defense Department had previously claimed. The General Accounting Office, now known as the Government Accountability Office, found that thousands of Marines had been exposed to the deadly herbicide, either by entering affected combat zones or being within 1 mile of combat zones that were doused with the chemical. Agent Orange had been deployed as a defoliant to clear forests and crops, but the toxic chemicals were found to cause dramatic health problems in humans, including multiple types of cancer and serious birth defects. Arguably, the most iconic NFL broadcasting duo ever took the mic for the first time on November 25th. when John Madden and Pat Summerall called the Minnesota Vikings-Tampa Bay Buccaneers game on CBS. Summerall played straight man to the larger-than-life Madden. The partnership lasted an astonishing 22 years, during which time NFL fans were introduced to the Turducken, a true artist of the telestrator, and of course, Madden Football, EA Sports. It's in the game. Heading into the final month of the final year of the 1970s, and much like the 70s, what began as fun ended with tragedy, as 11 people were fatally trampled at a concert by The Who. Outside the Riverfront Coliseum in Cincinnati, Ohio, eager fans crushed through the entrance shortly after the gates opened. The frenzied pace was caused by the seating, which was mostly first come, first served. The band was not informed of the tragedy until after the performance, because it was feared that the unruly crowd would riot if the concert was canceled.
We are aboard a huge starship called the Enterprise. This is the return of Captain Kirk.
An alien object of unbelievable destructive power is less than 3 days away from this planet.
He hates these cans! Stay away from the cans!
Okay, here's your question. Which trivia board game was invented by two Canadian journalists on December 15th? Give up? It was Chris Haney and Scott Abbott, who invented Trivial Pursuit that night while trying to devise a Scrabble variant and sharing a few beers. Today, it is among the most popular board games, having sold over 100 million copies and releasing several themed spin-offs, including a Harry Potter edition. You're a quizzer, Harry.
That I'm capable of taking care of him.
What do you mean?
I want my son.
You can't have him.
2 weeks later, Afghanistan's president, Hafizullah Amin, was taken out in a Soviet coup that went down on December 27th. Amin had overthrown the previous president, Mir Mohammad Taraki, just 4 months earlier. Amin's strict nationalist views, along with his pursuit of favorable relationships with both the United States and Pakistan, did not sit well with the Soviet Union. So Russian forces invaded just before the end of the decade to rub Amin out and install a pro-Russia president in his place, Barbara Karmel. The coup kicked off the Soviet-Afghan War, in which several insurgent groups collectively known as the Mujahideen fought against Soviet occupation. One significant figure in the Mujahideen was Osama bin Laden. And so, the 1970s, the decade of boogieing down, jumping buses, rationing gas, exiting the Vietnam War, resigning the presidency, and so very much more, came to a close. Undeniably, one of the most influential periods of modern history, the 1970s shaped America and the rest of the world in ways that we're still feeling the effects of to this day. The 1980s were now blazing into view, with Reaganomics, pastel detectives, and the end of the Cold War ready to ride into the danger zone in a time-traveling DeLorean. But that's next time. So what do you think? What was the most significant event of the 1970s? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other groovy timeline videos.